Cleopatra, in the golden cradle of the Nile, where reeds whisper secrets to the stars and the air holds the perfume of lotus and myrrh, a child was born to the royal house of Ptolemy. Her name was Cleopatra, a name that would echo through time like the toll of an ancient bell, both enchanting and formidable. Born in 69 BCE, Cleopatra VII. Philopator was destined not merely to reign, but to command the attention of the known world and to wrap it around her finger like silk. Her lineage was Macedonian Greek, descended from one of Alexander the Great's generals. But Cleopatra embraced Egypt with a devotion unlike her predecessors. She learned its language fluently, the only Ptolemaic ruler known to do so, and with it, she learned the soul of her people. She studied philosophy, astronomy, medicine, and literature in the Library of Alexandria, a place where the wisdom of millennia gathered like mist over the papyrus scrolls. Even in her youth, her mind was a treasury, her voice laced with silver, her will sharper than the obsidian blades of Nubian warriors. She did not inherit a peaceful throne. The Egyptian court was a nest of serpents' alliances frayed. Siblings watched one another with cold eyes. When her father, Ptolemy I, died, Cleopatra co-ruled with her brother, Ptolemy III, but the harmony was illusion. Tensions swelled. Exile followed. At just 21, she was cast out of power, her name nearly drowned by palace intrigue and Roman interference. But Cleopatra, daughter of Isis, was not to fade in exile. Then came the tide of fate. As civil war gripped Egypt and her brother's advisors schemed to keep her away from the palace, a visitor from the west arrived on Egyptian shores, Julius Caesar, the Roman general of unmatched ambition and gravity. In a move as daring as myth itself, Cleopatra had herself smuggled into Caesar's presence, some say wrapped in a carpet, others in linen, emerging not as a supplicant, but as a queen reborn. Caesar was captivated not by beauty alone, but by her intellect, wit, and political brilliance. She spoke to him in many tongues of governance, of philosophy, of power. With Roman legions now intertwined with Egyptian will, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne. Her younger brother was lost to the river of time, and she ruled beside her next sibling, Ptolemy XIV, and later with her own son, Caesarion, a child she claimed bore the blood of Caesar himself. Egypt was hers once more. The Nile glittered with celebration. Her subjects hailed her as a living goddess. In the years that followed, Cleopatra ruled with unmatched finesse. She strengthened Egypt's economy, stabilized its grain supplies, and revived temples to honor the gods of old. She adorned the capital with new monuments and restored others to splendor. She became, in the eyes of her people, not merely queen, but divine mother, the earthly form of Isis, protector of the land. But history's wheel turned again. After Caesar's assassination, the Roman Republic tore itself apart. Mark Antony, bold and unpredictable, arrived in Tarsus to summon Cleopatra. But it was she who summoned him in a spectacle of incense, golden sails, and robes spun like flame. She came not as a petitioner, but as a legend from dreams, floating down the river like a goddess returning home. He too was entranced. Their bond would shape the course of empires. Together they shared more than passion, they shared vision and power. Cleopatra bore him 3 children, and in time she would rise with him as rulers of the East, dreaming of a new world order, an empire from Egypt to the Indus. But such dreams were dangerous in Rome's eyes. Octavian, Caesar's adopted heir, painted them both as threats to Roman virtue. War was declared. At the Battle of Actium, their forces fell beneath the precision of Roman might. Cleopatra and Antony fled, their empire unraveling in the salt and smoke of defeat. In the final days, as Alexandria's walls trembled and the Nile seemed to mourn, Antony, misled by a cruel rumor of her death, fell upon his sword. Dying, he was carried to Cleopatra, and in her arms he breathed his last, the weight of their hopes dissolved in tragedy. Now alone, cornered by fate and by empire, Cleopatra made one final choice, refusing to be paraded in Roman chains. She donned her finest robes and received the asp or perhaps poison into her chamber. In her death, as in her life, she remained sovereign. On August 12, 30 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt passed into legend, veiled in mystery and myth. With her, an era ended. Egypt fell under Roman rule, and its throne would never again belong to one of its own. But Cleopatra's legacy endured. She had defied empire. She had ruled not only through power, but through presence blending politics and poetry, intellect and allure. She became an eternal figure in plays, in paintings, in the imaginations of rulers and dreamers. And now, as you rest your head and close your eyes, let her story wrap around you like warm linen. Remember her not only as a queen, but as a force of language, love, and sovereignty. In the hush of night, you may hear the Nile whisper her name, long and soft through the reeds. Sleep well, dear dreamer, under the same stars she once watched, and let the winds of ancient Egypt carry you to restful realms beyond time. Wu Zetian, in the vast jade hills of 7th century China, where the plum blossoms fall like whispered thoughts, and the sky brushes gently against the roofs of ancient temples, a girl was born beneath the quiet hush of heaven. Her name was Wu Zhao, though history would remember her as Wu Zetian, the only woman to ever sit upon the dragon throne of China as emperor in her own right. Born in 624 CE, during the Tang Dynasty, a time when poets wrote with brushstrokes like wind, and the empire stretched across deserts and mountains, Wu Zhao entered a world that had little space for women to rise. Her father, a respected official, allowed her to be educated like a son. She learned to read, to write, to reason. Her thoughts were not mere ripples, but deep currents, and her voice carried the calm strength of a still river hiding power beneath its surface. At the tender age of 14, she was brought to the palace of Emperor Taizong, chosen as one of many concubines. In that labyrinth of silk and shadows where power was whispered and rarely given, she observed. She listened. She waited. Though her beauty was noted, it was her intellect that shone. Yet upon the emperor's death, tradition dictated that concubines without sons were to be cloistered in Buddhist temples, far from the beating heart of politics. There, many lives faded into quiet. But not Wu Zhao. Fate, or perhaps her will, guided her back, for she had caught the eye of the new emperor, Gaozong, the son of Taizong. With boldness unspoken for women of her time, she returned to court and rose once more, this time not as a flower in the garden, but as a tree growing in the center of it. She became his most trusted consort, bearing him children and advice alike. Together they ruled, but it was Wu who mastered the web of court politics, who navigated the storms of rebellion, and who calmed the restless empire. When Emperor Gaozong's health declined, it was Wu who took the reins. Officially regent, she began to issue edicts in his name. Ministers bowed to her decisions. Her wisdom was undeniable. She reformed the bureaucracy, opened exams to commoners, supported agriculture, and strengthened the empire. But power once tasted does not easily return to silence. In 690 CE, Wu declared herself emperor, not empress, not regent, but emperor, the true sovereign of the Zhongguo, the Middle Kingdom. The heavens did not speak, but neither did they protest. She founded the short-lived Zhou dynasty, interrupting the Tang for 15 years, and seated herself upon the throne beneath the great golden dragon. Some say she ruled with cruelty, eliminating rivals, silencing critics. Others say she ruled with justice, promoting merit, advancing women, and lifting the poor. As all rulers who break old molds, she was both feared and revered. Her court brimmed with poets, scholars, and reformers. She commissioned great works, built temples, and shaped the land with roads and laws. Yet time, as ever, is unkind to all. In her later years, surrounded by ambitious courtiers and whispers of rebellion, her grasp weakened. Betrayals crept in like frost. Ministers turned against her. Her sons, once pawns, grew restless in the shadows of her towering presence. In 705, old and weary, Wu Zetian was forced to abdicate. She did so peacefully, retreating from the golden throne she had fought so long to claim. She died soon after, in a bed draped with silk, her legacy as complex as the empire she ruled. Her tombstone, unlike those of other rulers, bore no inscription, just a blank tablet, empty of words, empty perhaps to let the centuries write what they will. Or perhaps it was her final command, let my deeds speak. Now, gentle dreamer, let your eyes grow heavy as the stars emerge above ancient Loyang. Picture her silhouette against red lantern light, her brush dancing across parchment, her voice steady in a world that told her to be silent. Let her tale cradle you like the folds of a dragon robe, a story not just of power, but of purpose. Sleep well, traveler of time. In the hush between pages of history, may her spirit walk with you into dreams fierce, wise, and unbound. Hypatia. Long ago, in a city where the sands of the desert met the shimmering blue of the Mediterranean Sea, there stood a place where the mind was revered above all. Alexandria, a jewel of the ancient world, a city of scrolls, stars, and thinkers. And in that sacred city, beneath skies etched with constellations and winds heavy with jasmine, a girl was born whose mind would one day glow like a beacon against the coming dark. Her name was Hypatia. 2. The year was somewhere around 360 CE, though time in those days flowed less like numbers and more like stories passed down in whispers. Her father was Theon, a mathematician and philosopher, one of the last scholars of the great library of Alexandria. He taught her everything he knew, not merely arithmetic or astronomy, but how to think, how to question, how to seek the truth in the spiraling heavens and the smallest grain of sand. While other girls were taught to weave or serve, Hypatia learned to measure the paths of the stars. She studied the movement of the planets, traced the music of the spheres, and read texts from Plato, Aristotle, and Ptolemy. She rode through the city wrapped in flowing robes, her eyes calm, her speech eloquent. It is said she could silence a crowd of men with her words, not because she shouted, but because she made them listen. As she grew, so did her fame. Alexandria was a city of crossroads of Christians, pagans, Jews, philosophers, soldiers, and dreamers. And Hypatia, radiant in her intellect, taught them all. At the great halls of the Neoplatonist school, she spoke of geometry, ethics, and the divine harmony of the universe. They came from far and wide, not for miracles or magic, but to sit at her feet and learn to think freely. She was a woman, yes, but unlike any other. She rejected marriage, saying she was already wedded to philosophy. She moved among the city's elite and commoners alike, respected by governors, revered by students. Her chariot was a familiar sight on the sunlit streets of Alexandria. But the world was changing. The Roman Empire was dividing not just in geography, but in spirit. The old gods were fading. Christianity, once persecuted, now held power. And within that power, factions warred. Some sought peace, others sought purity. And in that purity, they began to fear what could not be controlled. And Hypatia could not be controlled. She counseled Orestes, the Roman governor of Egypt, who was locked in tense conflict with Bishop Cyril, the head of Alexandria's Christian leadership. Though Hypatia herself was not political, her association with the old philosophies and her closeness to Orestes made her a target for those who wanted a new, purified order, one where pagan thought, science, and the pursuit of reason had no place. Whispers became accusations. To some, she was a wise philosopher. To others, a symbol of heresy. One day in 415 CE, as the city baked beneath the spring sun and the sea glittered just beyond the harbor walls, Hypatia's chariot was stopped. A mob enraged and incited dragged her from the streets. What followed was not justice. It was fear, masked as faith. The details are dark and cruel, and they do not belong in the silence of the night. But know this, dear listener, her death was not the end. Her spirit, her legacy, her brilliance did not vanish with her final breath. It echoed in every scholar who questioned, in every scientist who looked skyward, in every girl who dared to think, to teach, to lead. Some say that with Hypatia's death, the last light of Alexandria flickered out, that the age of learning gave way to centuries of shadow. But that is not quite true, for even in the dark, embers remain, and her name whispered across time reminds us of a golden age when thought reigned free. So now let your eyes close gently. Picture her beneath the columns of the ancient library, scrolls laid before her like stars across a map. Hear the soft scratch of her stylus on parchment. Feel the wind from the sea, the hush of a world paused in wonder. She is there still in every question you dare to ask, in every truth you seek in quiet. Sleep now, child of stardust and stories. Sleep in the light of her legacy. And dream, as Hypatia once dreamed of worlds bound not by fear, but by reason, beauty, and the boundless sky. Queen Nefertiti, in the golden cradle of the ancient world, where the Nile flowed like a ribbon of life through the deserts of Egypt. A woman once walked who would be remembered not just for her beauty, but for her mystery, her power, and the light she brought to a kingdom. Her name was Nefertiti. She was born into a world of gods and temples, of stone carved with prayers and skies streaked with ibis wings. Her name meant, "The beautiful one has come," and to those who saw her, that was no exaggeration. But there was something more behind her coal-lined eyes, something deeper than her face, which would one day be sculpted into stone and preserved for thousands of years. Some say she was a princess from a noble house. Others whisper that she rose from more mysterious origins. What we know is this: she became queen beside a most unusual man, Pharaoh Akhenaten, the heretic king, the dreamer who turned from the old gods and lifted his gaze to the sun alone. Together they changed Egypt. In the city of Amarna, far from the temples of Karnak and the towering statues of Thebes, they built a new capital, not for Amun or Osiris, but for Aten the sun disk, the glowing orb of life. Akhenaten sang to the light in verses carved into stone, while Nefertiti stood beside him not as a shadow, but as an equal, crowned, radiant, beloved. She was seen in art unlike any queen before her, not hidden, not passive, but at the heart of power. She was shown embracing her children, guiding rituals, receiving the rays of Aten with open hands. Some believe she ruled as co-regent, others that she ruled alone for a time, cloaked in another name. And then she vanished. No record of her death, no known tomb, no farewell carved into the limestone. Like a breeze across the sands, she was suddenly gone. Yet her face remained. The bust of Nefertiti, with its perfect lines, serene gaze, and faint knowing smile, was buried beneath centuries of silence, only to be rediscovered in the 20th century. When it was lifted from the dust, the world paused in awe. Her eyes, though one unfinished, seemed to look beyond time itself. Was she a goddess, a queen, a priestess of light, or simply a woman who dared to live in a way the world would never forget? We may never know every detail of her reign, but perhaps that is how she wished it. Not all stars burn forever, some flicker brilliantly, briefly, then retreat into the vastness of the night. Let your breath slow now. Imagine yourself drifting down the Nile under a velvet sky, stars scattered like golden seeds across the heavens. The reeds whisper softly. Somewhere in the distance, the palace of Amarna still glows with forgotten songs. And there, on a balcony bathed in moonlight, stands Nefertiti, draped in linen, crowned in blue. She says nothing. She does not need to. Her presence is enough, a dream, a myth, a moment caught between memory and wonder. Sleep now beneath her sky. Let the mysteries rest beside you. And remember, beauty may fade, but grace true, radiant grace lives forever in the hearts of those who seek the light. Good night, dear dreamer. Sleep in peace. Eleanor of Aquitaine. In the gentle hush of twilight, when the sky melts into the hush of indigo, and the stars begin their soft procession, there lived a woman whose name would be etched into the chronicles of two mighty kingdoms and whispered in candlelit tales across centuries. Her name was Eleanor, Eleanor of Aquitaine. Born in the sun-drenched lands of southern France, where vineyards kissed the earth and troubadours filled the air with ballads, Eleanor was not a child raised in shadows. She grew up in courts where poetry flowed like wine, and love was both a song and a sword. Her father, Duke William Essex, ruled over Aquitaine, a realm rich in land, culture, and defiant spirit. When he died on a pilgrimage, the title passed not to a son, but to Eleanor. She was 15. She was now one of the most powerful heiresses in all of Europe, and she would not let the world forget it. Soon she married Louis, the young and devout King of France. Their wedding bound Aquitaine to the crown, but this was no quiet union. Eleanor brought with her the fire of the South, the boldness of poets and warriors. She rode with the king on the Second Crusade, cloaked in armor, her golden hair catching the desert sun. Yet the holy journey grew bitter. She clashed with Louis, whose piety cooled what passion had flickered between them. The crusade faltered, and so did their marriage. Upon their return, Eleanor sought freedom. In a time when queens were meant to be silent, she demanded annulment and won. But the story did not end in France. Soon after, Eleanor wed a man 11 years her junior, Henry of Anjou, destined to be King of England. With him, she bore 8 children, including Richard the Lionheart and King John. She became not only Queen of England, but mother to the future, her blood flowing through thrones yet to come. Her lands, combined with Henry's, stretched from Scotland to the Pyrenees, a vast empire that trembled with power. Yet life with Henry was no fairy tale. Their love turned to rivalry. Eleanor, never one to be ruled, supported her sons in rebellion against their father. She conspired, counseled, and commanded. She paid the price. Henry imprisoned her, not for a year, but for 16. Castles became her cage. The winds of Aquitaine whispered to her through stone walls. Still, she waited. When Henry died, Eleanor was freed, and like a lioness uncaged, she did not retreat to silence. In her 70s, she journeyed across Europe to fetch brides for her grandsons, negotiated treaties, and held regency when Richard left for the Crusades. She ruled when others faltered. She wrote letters that bent destinies. Through every trial, betrayal, captivity, war, Eleanor remained. Poised, proud, political, passionate. She lived into her 80s, an age few reached, and fewer still with such clarity. Her mind, they said, was sharp as ever. Her legend, long established, grew only more luminous. And when she finally lay to rest in the Abbey of Fontevraud beside Henry and Richard, it was as if a chapter in the world had gently closed. Even now, her effigy lies with a book in her hands. She does not sleep in death, she reads. Tonight, dear dreamer, picture her not as a statue or a queen lost to time, but as a woman riding across green hills with her cloak trailing behind, as a mother holding a crown in one hand and a quill in the other, as a soul who loved poetry, power, and the dance of light on stone. In Eleanor's life was not peaceful, but it was profound, and in the hush of night beneath the stars she once gazed upon from the ramparts of Aquitaine, her story drifts like music. Close your eyes now. Let the winds of her world sweep you into slumber, the soft rustle of silk, the echo of distant hooves, the flicker of candles on ancient walls. In that place between waking and dreaming, where memory and myth entwine, you may find her waiting, you reading still, guiding still, a queen in the quiet. Sleep well, noble listener. Let her courage warm your dreams. Isabella I of Castile. In the golden cradle of Castile, beneath skies painted with Spanish sun and shadow, a girl was born who would one day change the course of her country, her continent, and the very idea of empire. Isabella, daughter of John II of Castile, entered a world rife with political unrest, dynastic uncertainty, and rival factions clawing for control. But within her small frame burned a clarity of purpose far beyond her years. As a child, Isabella was raised away from the royal court in a modest setting, learning piety, discipline, and the deep roots of her Catholic faith. Her early years were quiet, but not untouched by turmoil. She watched kings and pretenders rise and fall, saw her half-brother, King Henry IV, struggle to hold a kingdom splintered by intrigue. When she was only 13, her mother died, and from that moment, Isabella became keenly aware that peace, power, and purpose would not be gifts handed to her. She would have to claim them with both resolve and grace. They tried to marry her off for political gain to Portuguese royalty, to foreign nobles who would control Castile through her womb. But Isabella resisted. When the moment came to choose, she made her own match. She married Ferdinand of Aragon in secret, against her half-brother's wishes and the court's command. It was a union of equals, though the world did not yet understand that a queen could rule beside her king, not beneath him, and together they would alter the fate of Spain. When Henry IV died, civil war nearly broke the kingdom. Isabella stood firm, a queen not by birthright alone, but by will. She led troops, negotiated with nobles, and declared herself the rightful sovereign of Castile. When the dust settled, she wore the crown not as a puppet, but as a monarch in her own right. With Ferdinand, she worked to unify Spain, two crowns, one vision. They reformed laws, centralized authority, and, most fatefully, launched the Spanish Inquisition. It was meant to create religious unity, but it came at a devastating human cost. Still, Isabella saw herself as God's servant, an instrument of divine order. Her faith shaped her policies, her court, and her conception of justice. But she was more than a zealot. Isabella championed education, established schools, and supported scholars. She was deeply involved in governance, presiding over councils, issuing edicts, and poring over reports late into the night. Her court became a place of intellectual ambition and iron discipline. And then came Columbus. When others dismissed him, Isabella listened. She funded his voyage not merely out of curiosity, but from a strategic vision to expand Spanish influence, to claim new lands for the crown and the church. When his ships returned from that fateful journey in 1492, bearing tales of a new world, Isabella's role as patron of empire was forever sealed. That same year, the Reconquista ended. The Muslim kingdom of Granada fell, and Isabella and Ferdinand rode through its gates, banners aloft, symbols of a unified Christian Spain. It was triumph and trauma woven together, the end of centuries of coexistence between Muslims, Christians, and Jews, replaced by a vision of singular devotion. Her reign was long, and its echoes are longer still. She died in 1504, mourned as the Catholic queen, leaving behind a country newly forged, but already shadowed by the weight of its ambitions. Isabella was not a figure of softness, but of steel wrapped in silk. Her dreams were vast, her flaws undeniable. She ruled with conviction, with fervor, with a heart that believed history could be shaped by faith and forged by discipline. So as night falls and the stars rise over Castile, think of her, the queen who read maps by candlelight, who chose love over command, who built a nation brick by brick, prayer by prayer. Sleep now, gentle dreamer, and drift through the halls of her palaces, the quiet chambers where she once knelt in prayer, the golden rooms where she signed her name to destinies. Let her story whisper to you through the stillness, reminding you that even the fiercest rulers were once children dreaming in shadows, and that even queens sleep at last. Catherine the Great. Catherine II, better known as Catherine the Great, was born on May 2, 1729 in Stettin, now Szczecin, Poland, a small Prussian town. She was born into the noble family of the Holstein-Gottorp, with her father being a minor prince, Christian Augustus of Holstein-Gottorp, and her mother, Princess Anna Petrovna, the daughter of Tsar Peter the Great of Russia. From a young age, Catherine's life was filled with ambition, intrigue, and the awareness that she was destined for something greater than the modest beginnings suggested by her family status. Catherine's early life was not one of luxury or ease. Her family was not wealthy, and her childhood was filled with the uncertainty that came from the unstable political environment of 18th century Europe. Her mother, a woman of great ambition, ensured that Catherine received a well-rounded education, which included not just the typical studies of the aristocracy, but also exposure to philosophy, politics, and the classics. Catherine was known for her intelligence and her ability to converse fluently in several languages, including French and German, which would later prove essential in her dealings with foreign diplomats and philosophers. At the age of 14, Catherine's life took a dramatic turn when she was selected to marry the future Tsar Peter III of Russia. This marriage, arranged by Empress Elizabeth of Russia, was politically motivated as it sought to strengthen ties between Russia and the Holstein-Gottorp family. Catherine, at that time known as Princess Sophie Friederike Augusta of Anhalt-Zerbst, was sent to Russia to prepare for her new life as the bride of the Russian heir. This decision marked the beginning of her transformation from a young, inexperienced princess to one of the most powerful and influential rulers in Russian history. Upon her arrival in Russia, Catherine faced immediate challenges. She had to adopt Russian customs, learn the language, and adapt to the court's intricate and sometimes treacherous politics. Her relationship with her husband, Peter III, was cold and distant, and it quickly became apparent that their marriage was not a happy one. Peter was immature, erratic, and unpopular, whereas Catherine was intelligent, composed, and focused on her future. Catherine's political acumen began to shine as she formed alliances with key figures in the Russian court, particularly the powerful nobles who were dissatisfied with Peter's rule. Catherine's rise to power was a result of both her strategic brilliance and her ability to seize the moment. In 1762, just a few years after the marriage, a coup was orchestrated by Catherine and her supporters. In a bold move, Catherine deposed her husband, Peter III, and declared herself Empress of Russia. Peter was arrested and shortly thereafter died under mysterious circumstances, though it is unclear whether his death was the result of his arrest or foul play. Catherine's ascension to the throne was a turning point in Russian history, for it marked the beginning of a reign that would profoundly shape Russia's future. Catherine's early reign was characterized by a determination to consolidate power and ensure stability in her vast empire. She was highly aware of the challenges that came with being a woman in a position of absolute power. To secure her legitimacy, she skillfully portrayed herself as the rightful heir to the Russian throne, emphasizing her ties to the Romanov family and her love for Russian culture. Catherine also endeared herself to her people through her reforms and her commitment to education. She worked to improve the legal system, promoted the arts and sciences, and encouraged the growth of Russia's economy. One of the defining features of Catherine's reign was her commitment to the Enlightenment, the intellectual movement that emphasized reason, individualism, and skepticism of traditional authority. Catherine corresponded with many of the era's leading philosophers, including Voltaire and Diderot, and she sought to bring some of their progressive ideas into Russian governance. She introduced reforms aimed at modernizing the Russian legal code, promoting education for women, and increasing the involvement of the Russian nobility in local governance. However, her reign was not without its challenges. In 1773, the Pugachev Rebellion broke out in the southern regions of Russia. The rebellion, led by a Cossack named Yemelyan Pugachev, was fueled by widespread dissatisfaction among the peasantry, who were subjected to harsh conditions under Catherine's policies. Although the rebellion was eventually crushed, it highlighted the difficulties Catherine faced in balancing her desire to modernize Russia with the realities of governing a vast empire with a deeply entrenched class system. The rebellion also forced Catherine to reconsider her approach to serfdom, though she never fully abolished it, as it was crucial to the Russian economy. Catherine's foreign policy was equally ambitious and successful. She expanded Russian territory through a series of military campaigns, particularly in the Black Sea region and into the Crimea. She also played a key role in the partitioning of Poland, which resulted in the division of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth among Russia, Prussia, and Austria. Under her rule, Russia emerged as a major European power, with an influence that reached from the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, and from the Polish borders to the Pacific Ocean. Despite her successes, Catherine's reign also had a darker side. She was not above using ruthless tactics to maintain her power. She was known to manipulate and exile those who posed a threat to her, including some of her closest advisors. One of the most notable examples of this was the fate of her former lover, Grigory Orlov, who fell out of favor and was sent into exile. Additionally, Catherine's policies toward the serfs were often harsh, and despite her early advocacy for their welfare, she ultimately reinforced the system of serfdom, which kept millions of Russians in bondage. Catherine's later years were marked by personal isolation. She outlived many of her close allies and advisors, and her health began to decline. However, she remained an active and capable ruler until her death on November 17, 1796, at the age of 67. Her son, Paul I, succeeded her to the throne, though his reign was marked by turmoil and a rejection of his mother's reforms. Catherine the Great's legacy is multifaceted and complex. She transformed Russia from a relatively backward nation into one of the most powerful empires in the world. Her reign is remembered for its ambitious reforms, cultural achievements, and military successes. She is often praised for her intellectual curiosity and her efforts to modernize Russia. But she is also criticized for her failure to address the plight of the serfs and her autocratic methods of rule. Nevertheless, Catherine remains one of the most iconic female monarchs in history, admired for her intelligence, political savvy, and determination. As you close your eyes and drift off to sleep, think of Catherine the Great, a queen who ascended to the highest echelons of power through sheer force of will and intellect. Her life was marked by great triumphs and difficult challenges, but through it all, she remained resolute in her vision for Russia. May her story inspire you to dream boldly, knowing that even in the face of adversity, strength and wisdom can lead to greatness. Sleep well, dear dreamer, with the knowledge that Catherine's legacy continues to shape the world in ways that are still felt today. Elizabeth I of England. Elizabeth I, born on September 7, 1533, was the daughter of King Henry VIII and his second wife, Anne Boleyn. Her birth, much anticipated by her father, was initially met with disappointment as he had hoped for a male heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. However, this disappointment was short-lived, for Elizabeth would come to be one of the most influential and revered monarchs in British history. She was born at a turbulent time, with England caught in a web of religious conflict, political upheaval, and the ongoing struggle for the throne. Elizabeth's early life was marked by tragedy and political intrigue. Her mother, Anne Boleyn, was executed when Elizabeth was just 2 years old, accused of treason and adultery in a plot orchestrated by her father. Elizabeth's position as heir to the throne was uncertain, and she spent much of her childhood in isolation, surrounded by royal intrigues and courtly plots. Nevertheless, Elizabeth was remarkably well educated for a woman of her time. She was fluent in several languages, including Latin, French, and Italian, and was schooled in literature, rhetoric, history, and politics. Her sharp intellect and keen understanding of statecraft would later serve her well as she navigated the complexities of ruling England. In her early teens, Elizabeth was declared illegitimate following the annulment of her father's marriage to her mother. Despite this, she remained a favorite of Henry VIII's court and was allowed to receive an excellent education. Her position, while precarious, provided her with valuable insight into the workings of the royal court and the intricacies of power. Elizabeth's rise to the throne came after the deaths of her half-brother, Edward VI, and her half-sister, Mary I, both of whom left behind no heirs. When Elizabeth became queen in 1558, at the age of 25, England was in a state of turmoil. The country had suffered under the rule of her sister, Mary I, who had attempted to restore Catholicism in England, leading to the infamous Marian persecutions, during which hundreds of Protestants were executed. The English people, weary of religious conflict, looked to Elizabeth for stability and direction. With her ascension to the throne, Elizabeth sought to bring an end to the religious strife that had plagued her country, and she firmly established Protestantism as the state religion, setting the stage for a new era in English history. At the start of her reign, Elizabeth faced a series of challenges, both domestic and international. Internally, she had to manage the complicated politics of her court and ensure the loyalty of powerful nobles, some of whom had their own ambitions. Externally, Elizabeth had to contend with the ongoing threat from Catholic powers, particularly Spain, which was ruled by the fiercely Catholic king Philip II. The most famous moment of this threat came in 1588, when Philip sent the Spanish Armada to invade England. The Spanish fleet was vast and powerful, but Elizabeth's navy, aided by fierce storms, was able to repel the invaders, marking one of the most significant military victories in English history. This victory cemented Elizabeth's reputation as a capable and resilient leader. While Elizabeth's reign is often remembered for its military victories, it was her political acumen and skillful management of her court that truly defined her legacy. Elizabeth was a master of diplomacy and had the rare ability to play rivals against each other. Her court was filled with factions vying for power, yet Elizabeth maintained control by fostering an atmosphere of loyalty and discipline. She was known for her intelligence, her sharp wit, and her ability to navigate complex political situations. Her leadership was characterized by pragmatism, as she often sought peaceful solutions to conflicts rather than resorting to war, though she was not afraid to use military force when necessary. Elizabeth also made astute use of her image and her role as a monarch. She cultivated a powerful and memorable image as the Virgin Queen, a symbol of both the nation's purity and her personal independence. The persona of the Virgin Queen was a carefully constructed one, used to enhance her authority and to project an image of strength and unity. Elizabeth's unmarried status, though often a subject of speculation, was also a political tool, as it allowed her to avoid the influence of a foreign husband and to maintain control over her own destiny. She was a queen who ruled by her own will, and her image as an icon of chastity and strength resonated deeply with her subjects. One of Elizabeth's greatest achievements was her ability to balance the complex religious tensions in England. The Protestant Reformation had divided Europe, and England had been at the center of this religious upheaval. Elizabeth's religious settlement, known as the Elizabethan religious settlement, established a middle ground between Catholicism and Protestantism, which allowed England to avoid the religious wars that ravaged much of Europe. While she faced constant pressure from Catholic Europe, particularly from Pope Pius V, who excommunicated her in 1570, Elizabeth's policies ensured that England remained steadfastly Protestant, but with tolerance for a certain level of Catholic practices. This balance helped to stabilize her kingdom and kept England united during a time of great religious division. However, Elizabeth's reign was not without its challenges. She faced numerous conspiracies against her, both from foreign powers and from within her own court. One of the most notable was the Babington Plot in 1586, which sought to place the Catholic Mary, Queen of Scots, on the throne. Elizabeth's decision to execute Mary, despite the political ramifications, was a testament to her determination to protect her reign. The execution of Mary, however, led to further tensions with Catholic Europe, particularly Spain, and played a role in the eventual outbreak of the Anglo-Spanish War. The later years of Elizabeth's reign were marked by a decline in her health and a growing sense of melancholy. She outlived many of her closest advisors and companions, and the loss of several key figures in her court, such as her trusted secretary Sir William Cecil, left her feeling increasingly isolated. Despite these personal struggles, Elizabeth continued to rule with strength and dignity. Her reign saw the flourishing of the arts, with the Elizabethan era becoming one of the most celebrated periods in English cultural history. The works of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, and Edmund Spenser were created during her reign, marking an era of unparalleled artistic achievement. Elizabeth I died on March 24, 1603, after a reign of 44 years, the longest of any English monarch at the time. Her death marked the end of the Tudor dynasty and the beginning of the Stuart era, with the ascension of James VI of Scotland, who became James I of England. Elizabeth's death was mourned by her people, who had come to see her not only as their monarch but as a symbol of England itself. Her legacy, however, would live on for centuries. She had left England a powerful nation, a nation that would continue to shape world history for generations to come. As you close your eyes, dear dreamer, think of Elizabeth I, a queen who ruled with wisdom, strength, and grace. In a world where women were often denied power, she stood as a beacon of possibility, her reign a testament to what can be achieved through intelligence, perseverance, and a fierce determination to lead. May her legacy of resilience and vision inspire your dreams tonight, and may you find in her story the courage to chart your own course in life with all the strength of a queen. Sleep well, knowing that Elizabeth's reign remains etched in history as one of the most remarkable periods of leadership and triumph. Joan of Arc. In the quiet folds of the French countryside, where lavender winds brush over fields of grain and the sun spills golden light upon humble cottages, there was born a girl unlike any other. Her name would echo across centuries, whispered in reverence, awe, and sorrow: Joan of Arc, the Maid of Orleans, the girl who spoke to angels and challenged kings. Her beginning was simple, soft as river water and as earthy as tilled soil. Born in Domremy, a small village cloaked in the arms of France, Joan was the daughter of Jacques and Isabel, peasants of modest means but quiet dignity. Their home was one of prayer, labor, and trust in God's providence. Joan, even as a child, bore a stillness in her eyes, a gaze that wandered to the skies as though they whispered secrets only she could hear. By candlelight, she would kneel in the village chapel, her young fingers entwined in prayer, her thoughts far beyond her years. France was fractured then, torn between kingdoms and plagued by the 100 Years' War. But in Domremy, Joan tended sheep, learned the weave of fabrics, the weight of silence, and the voice of faith. And then came the voices. She was 13 when they first arrived, like a breeze through cathedral glass. St. Michael, St. Catherine, and St. Margaret radiant, resolute, and filled with celestial calm. They spoke not in riddles but with clarity. France was in peril, and Joan had been chosen. A child, a peasant, a girl. But destiny, like fire, does not care for station. At first she resisted. Her heart beat with disbelief. Yet the voices came again, insistent, unwavering. France needed a savior, and the Dauphin Charles, heir to the throne, needed a sword forged in purity and divine truth. The saints entrusted her with a sacred duty, to lift the siege of Orleans, to crown the rightful king, to save a realm. So she went. Dressed as a man to protect her modesty, Joan cut her hair and donned armor. She rode not like a warrior, but like a vision, her banner emblazoned with lilies in Christ's name. She was 16, yet men thrice her age bowed their heads, moved by her fire, her unwavering conviction. Her voice, they said, was as clear as spring water, her eyes lit with otherworldly purpose. At Orleans she charged not just the enemy, but despair itself. With sword raised and spirit fierce, she led the French to victory, lifting the siege and changing the tide of war. The once doubtful soldiers now sang her name in reverence. And at Rheims, beneath vaulted arches and incense-sweetened air, Charles was crowned king just as she had vowed. But power courts envy, and miracles unsettle men of earthly hunger. As her victories mounted, so too did suspicion. A woman leading armies, claiming visions it was too much for those chained to order. Her purity threatened their corruption, her success, their pride. Captured near Compiègne, Joan was handed over to the English. No rescue came. The very crown she helped to forge turned its gaze away, and so she was left in darkness. In Rouen, they placed her on trial. They did not seek truth, they sought silence. She was interrogated for months alone, exhausted, shackled. They twisted her words and mocked her faith. They called her a heretic, a witch, a liar. She held fast. Her answers were clear, unwavering, full of grace even in torment. But they feared her voice, and more, the purity behind it. On a gray May morning, beneath a sky heavy with sorrow, Joan was led to the marketplace. She wore a plain white dress, her hands bound, her head held high. They tied her to the stake, and the fire was lit. As the flames rose, she cried only one name, not revenge, not fear, but Jesus. Witnesses wept. Even her executioners were shaken, and as the fire took her body, it could not burn her truth. Joan of Arc became more than flesh. She became flame. Years passed, decades. The church that condemned her later declared her innocent, and centuries later, she was canonized a saint. Her image now graces cathedrals and altars, not as a warrior alone, but as a symbol of faith in the face of overwhelming darkness. Joan's legacy is not bound by her battles. It is bound by courage, by obedience to truth, by the quiet might of a heart that refused to bow to anything but the light. And now, dear dreamer, let her story settle like a feather upon your mind. Let the echoes of her banner flap softly in the wind. Hear the distant hoof beats of a girl who rode into fire not with anger, but with divine trust. Sleep now in the hush that follows history, for even in slumber her spirit watches calm, luminous, eternal. Sleep well, dear dreamer, for the saints still whisper, and somewhere a girl of stars still rides through the night. Mary Wollstonecraft. Mary Wollstonecraft, born on April 27, 1759, in London, England, was a woman who would become a beacon of enlightenment, intellect, and radical change in the 18th century. She was the second of 6 children born to Edward John Wollstonecraft and Elizabeth Dixon, who came from a middle-class family. Her early years were marred by the instability caused by her father's reckless financial habits. He squandered the family's money, leaving them impoverished, which significantly impacted Mary's childhood. The financial difficulties and her father's eventual descent into alcoholism made life in her home unpredictable and strained. At an early age, Mary learned the harsh lessons of survival, self-reliance, and resilience. Her father's unpredictable behavior left Mary to care for her mother and siblings, and she began to grow into an independent and determined young woman. As a result of her circumstances, Mary began to look beyond the traditional gender roles and societal expectations of women. She was often introspective and deeply troubled by the limitations placed on women's lives, particularly their educational and intellectual constraints. Her desire to pursue a meaningful life was at odds with the typical expectations placed on women at the time to marry and raise a family. Despite these barriers, Wollstonecraft's hunger for knowledge led her to pursue a life outside of the conventional female roles of the day. As a young woman, she left home to work as a governess and a teacher, and her independence and intellect began to shine through. It was during this time that she also began to nurture her writing skills, developing a passion for literature, politics, and philosophy. She wrote her first novel, Mary of Fiction, in 1788, which reflected her frustrations with the limitations of women's roles and highlighted her yearning for greater personal autonomy. This novel, though not widely known in its time, was one of the early manifestations of her feminist ideals and became a precursor to her later groundbreaking work. Wollstonecraft's early years of work as a governess and teacher gave her a unique understanding of the plight of women who were confined to roles that limited their opportunities for personal growth and education. As she observed the lives of women around her, she became acutely aware of the unfairness of their position in society. The relationships she had with her pupils and their families fueled her belief that education was the key to changing women's subjugated position in society. Mary Wollstonecraft's intellectual journey took a transformative turn when she encountered the writings of the French philosophers during the revolutionary fervor that gripped Europe in the late 18th century. She immersed herself in the ideas of Rousseau, Voltaire, and the works of Enlightenment thinkers who advocated for liberty, equality, and fraternity. The French Revolution, which erupted in 1789, was a source of great inspiration for Wollstonecraft. She saw in it the potential for profound social change, and it further convinced her that a revolution in women's rights was needed as well. Wollstonecraft's path to becoming a key figure in the early feminist movement began with the publication of A Vindication of the Rights of Woman in 1792. In this work, she challenged the traditional views of women's roles and argued passionately for their right to education, independence, and equality. At the time, the prevailing view in society was that women were intellectually inferior to men and that their primary role was to serve as wives and mothers. Wollstonecraft vehemently rejected this idea, believing that women had the same capacity for reason and intellectual growth as men, and thus should have access to the same educational opportunities. In A Vindication of the Rights of Woman, she argued that women's perceived inferiority was not a result of their nature, but rather the result of their lack of proper education. She claimed that women were systematically denied the intellectual and emotional freedom needed to cultivate their talents, and as a result, they were confined to lives of domesticity and submission. Wollstonecraft's vision of equality included a complete overhaul of the education system, as she believed that proper education was the key to unlocking women's potential. In her work, she called for women to be treated as rational beings who were capable of contributing meaningfully to society. This revolutionary text was met with a great deal of backlash, particularly from male critics who were disturbed by the idea of women stepping out of their traditional roles. Many criticized her for challenging deeply ingrained social norms, and some even accused her of promoting licentiousness. However, despite the controversy, A Vindication of the Rights of Woman has since become one of the foundational texts of modern feminism, and Wollstonecraft's arguments continue to resonate with gender equality advocates today. Wollstonecraft's writings did not end with a vindication of the rights of woman. She continued to write on a variety of topics, including politics, ethics, and the role of women in society. In addition to her revolutionary feminist ideas, she was also a strong proponent of the rights of men, advocating for political reforms and the establishment of a more just and equitable society. Her work often bridged the gap between the progressive ideals of the French Revolution and the traditional views of British society. Wollstonecraft's personal life, however, was marked by turmoil and contradiction. Her passionate ideals were often at odds with her relationships. In 1797, she became involved with the philosopher William Godwin, an equally radical thinker, and the two eventually had a daughter, whom they named Mary after her. Their relationship was complex, and although they were not married, they shared a deep intellectual bond. Tragically, Wollstonecraft died just days after giving birth to her daughter in September 1797 at the age of 38. Her death left a profound mark on her daughter, who would go on to become Mary Shelley, the famous author of Frankenstein. Wollstonecraft's legacy lived on through her daughter's work and through the countless women who were inspired by her tireless advocacy for women's rights. Though her life was short, her ideas were revolutionary, and her writing had a lasting impact on the fight for gender equality. Mary Wollstonecraft's legacy is not just one of intellectual achievement, but of courage, conviction, and a deep commitment to justice. Her life serves as a reminder that great change often begins with one voice, and that the fight for equality is a long and ongoing process. Through her words and her actions, she showed the world that women have the right to autonomy, education, and the opportunity to shape their own destinies. As you close your eyes tonight, dear dreamer, let her fierce determination and vision for a just world guide you into a peaceful sleep. Rest well, knowing that the legacy of Mary Wollstonecraft lives on, lighting the way for those who continue to fight for equality and justice. Sojourner Truth. Sojourner Truth, born Isabella Baumfree. On November 26, 1797, in Swartykill, New York, was a woman whose life and words would echo throughout history. Born into slavery, Truth's early years were marked by the brutal realities of bondage. Her parents, James and Elizabeth Baumfree, were enslaved Africans on a Dutch-owned farm in the New York region. Truth was one of 13 children born to them, and her early life was spent in constant hardship, having been separated from her family at a young age, as was common among enslaved individuals. Isabella was given to a series of different masters, which meant a fragmented childhood filled with fear and instability. Growing up under the harsh yoke of slavery, Truth suffered physical abuse and emotional neglect. She was sold several times, and at the age of 9, she was sold for the first time to a man named John Neely, who was a cruel master. It was under Neely's ownership that she first tasted the cruelty that would shape her life. She would later reflect on these early years with a mixture of bitterness and strength, recognizing the experiences of suffering as the crucible in which her spirit was forged. In 1815, at the age of 18, Isabella was sold to a man named John Dumont. It was in his service that she came into contact with the person who would forever change her life. While enslaved at Dumont's farm, Isabella met a man named Thomas, with whom she had a daughter named Sophia. Their relationship was a brief and painful one, as it did not lead to the lasting partnership she had hoped for. After this, she met and had another child with a different man named James, who she never married. Although she had children while in slavery, she was never granted custody of them, as they were also bound by the chains of slavery. At the age of 30, Isabella made the courageous decision to escape her enslaved life. Her journey towards freedom began when she learned of New York's gradual emancipation law, which promised the eventual freedom of enslaved individuals after a set period of time. In 1826, after giving birth to her fifth child, Isabella fled to the nearby town of New Paltz. She eventually found refuge with a family that had freedom. After escaping, Isabella's life began anew, but her past remained an ever-present part of her story. She changed her name to Sojourner Truth, believing that she was called to travel the world and speak out for the abolition of slavery and for women's rights. Truth's journey as an advocate for human rights began in earnest when she moved to the city of New York. She became deeply involved in the abolitionist movement, seeking not only to end the injustice of slavery, but also to raise awareness about the plight of women. Her powerful oratory skills quickly caught the attention of prominent abolitionists, and she became a highly sought-after speaker. In the mid-1840s, Sojourner Truth began touring the country as an itinerant preacher, delivering speeches on the abolition of slavery, the empowerment of women, and the intersectionality of race, gender, and oppression. One of Truth's most famous speeches, "Ain't I a Woman?" was delivered in 1851 at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. In this speech, Truth boldly challenged the prevailing notions of racial and gender inferiority that dominated the social fabric of her time. She stood before the audience, a black woman in a world that marginalized her turn, and posed a profound question: "Ain't I a woman?" Truth used this question to speak about the strength and resilience of women, particularly black women, who had been overlooked and undervalued in both abolitionist and feminist movements. Through her words, she questioned the contradictions between the ways women were treated and the ways men were regarded, particularly regarding labor and capability. Despite facing racial prejudice within the women's suffrage movement, Sojourner Truth remained undeterred in her mission to ensure that women, particularly black women, were given their rightful place in society. She worked alongside abolitionists like Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison, and her words resonated powerfully with those who heard her speak. She was known for her combination of emotional power, plain-spoken wisdom, and unshakable conviction. Truth's advocacy was not limited to speeches and conventions. She actively participated in the Underground Railroad, assisting runaway slaves and aiding them in their flight to freedom. Her own experience as a runaway slave made her uniquely equipped to help others navigate the dangerous path to freedom, offering them guidance and support in the face of relentless danger. As the Civil War broke out in 1861, Truth continued to lend her voice to the cause of abolition. During the war, she met President Abraham Lincoln and petitioned him to grant black men the right to fight in the war. She also advocated for the establishment of a National Freedmen's Bureau to help former slaves transition to freedom. Truth's activism was relentless, and her role in the war effort was one of advocacy for the disenfranchised, as she sought to empower black men and women who had been marginalized throughout American history. After the Civil War, Sojourner Truth continued to advocate for women's rights, though she would eventually grow disillusioned with the women's suffrage movement due to its inability to fully address the rights of black women. Throughout the Reconstruction era, Truth's tireless efforts led her to work with other suffragists, including Susan B. Anthony, but it became clear that the struggle for racial equality and gender equality would not be united in her lifetime. Sojourner Truth's contributions to the abolitionist movement, women's rights, and civil rights have cemented her legacy as one of the greatest advocates for equality in American history. She lived out her final years in Michigan, where she died on November 26, 1883, at the age of 86. In the years following her death, Truth's legacy would be revived by successive generations of women and activists who looked to her life for inspiration and strength. Today, Sojourner Truth is remembered not only for her exceptional advocacy for abolition and women's rights, but also for the powerful way in which she embodied the values of justice, resilience, and compassion. Her name lives on through schools, monuments, and historical sites. ensuring that her voice remains a guiding light for those who continue to fight for justice in the modern world. As you drift into sleep, dear dreamer, remember Sojourner Truth's courage and unwavering commitment to equality. Her life reminds us that even in the darkest of times, one voice can rise and change the world. Sleep well, knowing that the strength of truth lives on in us all. Harriet Tubman. Harriet Tubman, born Araminta Ross on the 11th of January 1822 in Dorchester County, Maryland, was destined to become one of the most remarkable figures in American history. Born into slavery on the plantation of Edward Brodess, she was the fifth of 9 children in a family subjected to the harsh realities of the South. Her early years were marked by the brutalities of slavery, witnessing her family members sold and experiencing the ever-present threat of being separated from those she loved. Her mother, Harriet Green, was an exceptionally strong woman who, despite being enslaved, instilled in her children a deep sense of resilience, survival, and hope. Tubman's father, Ben Ross, worked as a skilled woodworker, a craft he passed on to his children, and though he had the benefit of some privileges as a skilled laborer, his family's life was still bound by the chains of slavery. Harriet's early experiences were fraught with hardship, but they also forged in her a sense of self-reliance and determination. From an early age, she was forced to work in the fields, often enduring beatings and physical labor beyond her years. As a young girl, she suffered a traumatic head injury when an overseer threw a heavy object at her, which resulted in a deep, lifelong wound. This injury would cause her to experience frequent seizures and visions throughout her life, which she later believed were divinely inspired. Despite these hardships, Harriet began to yearn for freedom and escape from the shackles of her environment. She married a free black man named John Tubman in 1844, taking the name Harriet Tubman, but their marriage would later fall apart when she decided to flee for her life. In 1849, realizing that she was soon to be sold to a new master, Harriet escaped the oppressive life of slavery by traveling north to Philadelphia. It was an arduous journey fraught with danger, but she succeeded, managing to escape on foot, guided by the stars and a network of Underground Railroad safe houses. When Harriet arrived in Philadelphia, she found freedom, but it wasn't the end of her journey. The experience of being free made her feel an overwhelming sense of responsibility to others, still trapped in slavery. She couldn't rest while her family and friends were still enslaved. Her decision to return to the South in order to rescue others would mark the beginning of her extraordinary work as a conductor on the Underground Railroad, the clandestine network of safe houses and secret routes that helped slaves escape to freedom in the North or Canada. Over the course of 10 years, Harriet made 19 trips back to the South, helping to guide hundreds of enslaved individuals to freedom. She did so with a combination of bravery, cunning, and divine inspiration, as she believed that God was guiding her every step. Using secret routes and relying on trusted allies, she brought men, women, and children to safety, often making dangerous and long journeys, crossing hostile territories. At great personal risk, she never lost a passenger and became known as Moses by those she helped. Her ability to navigate the complex routes of the Underground Railroad was legendary, and her efforts in assisting others to escape slavery earned her a place in history as one of the most courageous and selfless women of the 19th century. The risks she faced were immense. Harriet had to avoid slave catchers, bounty hunters, and the ever-present possibility of betrayal. She would often travel by night, hiding by day, and rely on a network of abolitionists and allies to provide shelter and supplies. Even with the risk of capture, she persisted in her mission, determined to save as many people as possible. The bravery required to keep moving forward, despite the ever-present danger, was immeasurable. Harriet's impact didn't stop with her work on the Underground Railroad. During the Civil War, she became a spy and scout for the Union Army. In addition to guiding enslaved people to freedom, She played a vital role in gathering intelligence, even serving as the first woman to lead an armed expedition in the war. She worked alongside Colonel James Montgomery in South Carolina, leading a raid on plantations and liberating more than 700 slaves. She was involved in organizing and orchestrating the raid that liberated these men, women, and children, proving that her courage and ingenuity extended beyond the Underground Railroad. After the war, Harriet returned to her family and dedicated herself to furthering the cause of emancipation. She worked tirelessly on behalf of the formerly enslaved, advocating for their rights and supporting the growing movement for civil rights and women's suffrage. Her home in Auburn, New York, became a sanctuary for people in need, and she continued to help others, even as she struggled with the physical and mental tolls of her past. Harriet's legacy, however, is not just in her work for freedom and justice, but also in her ability to inspire others to take action. Her courage and selflessness became a beacon for the abolitionist movement, and her efforts helped to shine a light on the inhumanity of slavery. She became an icon of freedom, a symbol of resilience, and a testament to the strength of the human spirit. As she grew older, Harriet's health began to fail, and she had to deal with the long-lasting effects of the injuries she sustained during her time as a slave, as well as the strain of her years spent in the service of others. Harriet passed away on March 10, 1913, at the age of 91, in her home in Auburn. Her death was mourned by many, but her spirit lived on in the movement for civil rights and equality. Harriet Tubman's legacy has continued to grow over the years. She is now remembered not only for her tireless work in freeing enslaved people, but also for her contributions to the abolitionist movement and her deep commitment to justice. Her life remains an inspiration for people around the world, particularly women and African Americans, as a symbol of perseverance, strength, and selflessness. Harriet Tubman defied the limits placed upon her by society and history, and in doing so, she carved out a legacy that will never be forgotten. Her legacy lives on in countless ways, from the naming of schools and institutions in her honor to monuments and memorials that pay tribute to her courage and vision. In 2016, Harriet Tubman was chosen to appear on the $20 bill, a powerful symbol of the long overdue recognition of her contributions to American history. As the day fades and the stars fill the sky, think of Harriet, who risked everything to ensure that others could live free. Her courage lives on, and as you drift into sleep, remember that even in the darkest times, one person can change the world. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and know that the strength and resilience of Harriet Tubman reside within you, inspiring you as you journey through your dreams. Ada Lovelace. Ada Lovelace, born Augusta Ada Byron on December 10, 1815, in London, England, was a visionary whose groundbreaking work laid the foundation for modern computing. The daughter of the famed poet Lord Byron and his wife, Annabella Milbank, Ada's early life was marked by a unique blend of creativity and intellectual curiosity. Though her father, Lord Byron, was a celebrated literary figure, his tumultuous relationship with Ada's mother led to his departure from the family when Ada was just a few months old. Ada would grow up without a direct relationship with him, but the impact of his legacy and his flair for imagination would reverberate through her life in unexpected ways. From an early age, Ada showed a profound aptitude for mathematics and science, a rare talent for a woman of her time. Annabella, a highly educated woman herself, was determined to ensure that her daughter would not inherit the more volatile and poetic traits of her father. Instead, she sought to instill in Ada a disciplined and rigorous intellectual foundation, particularly in the subjects of mathematics and logic. Ada's mother hired private tutors, and she became an eager student of mathematics, developing a passion for the subject that would define her career. As a child, Ada's interests were wide-ranging and imaginative. Her passion for science was deeply intertwined with her love for the arts, a duality that became the cornerstone of her work. While she was fascinated by the principles of mathematics, she was equally drawn to the imaginative possibilities of scientific invention. Ada's future, it seemed, would be one that bridged the seemingly disparate worlds of creativity and analytical thinking. At the age of 17, Ada met Charles Babbage, a mathematician and inventor who is often credited with designing the first mechanical computer, known as the analytical engine. It was through Babbage that Ada's intellectual horizons expanded as she began to grasp the enormity of the potential of mechanical computation. Babbage's invention was the precursor to modern computing, but at the time it was still a complex and theoretical concept. His machine was designed to perform mathematical calculations using a series of gears, levers, and punch cards, an idea that had the potential to revolutionize the way humans interacted with numbers and data. Babbage was a visionary, and he quickly recognized Ada's extraordinary intellect. He invited her to study his designs and contribute to his work, which marked the beginning of a profound collaboration between the two. While Babbage focused on the engineering aspects of the analytical engine, Ada saw something that no one else had yet recognized. The machine could do much more than just calculate numbers. She perceived the potential of the analytical engine to perform any task that could be broken down into a series of logical steps, a concept that would become known as programming. In 1843, Ada was introduced to an Italian mathematician named Luigi Federico Menabrea, who had written an article on Babbage's analytical engine. Ada translated Menabrea's work into English, but she did far more than simply translate his words. She added her own extensive notes, which were 3 times the length of the original article. In these notes, Ada described how the machine could be programmed to perform complex calculations, far beyond the mere arithmetic for which Babbage had originally conceived it. She even went so far as to describe a method for calculating Bernoulli numbers, a concept that is widely considered to be the first algorithm intended to be carried out by a machine. This insight, her understanding of the potential for machines to follow sequences of instructions to solve problems, is what has led many to call her the first computer programmer. Ada's notes were not recognized as groundbreaking during her lifetime, but they would later become a key component of the history of computing. Her vision was far ahead of her time, and the seeds she planted would sprout in the early 20th century with the development of the electronic computer. However, during her lifetime, Ada's work was largely forgotten. Despite her brilliance, she faced societal barriers due to her gender. The Victorian era was not an easy time for women to be taken seriously in the world of academia, and even though she was the daughter of a famous poet, her contributions to science were often overshadowed by the prevailing societal norms of her time. Her mother, despite being an intellectual, did not support her interest in mathematics in the same way she might have supported a male relative. Instead, she urged Ada to focus on her household duties and social responsibilities. Nevertheless, Ada pressed on, driven by an unshakable belief in the importance of her work. Ada's health, which had always been fragile, began to deteriorate in her late 30s. She suffered from numerous illnesses, and by 1852, at the age of 36, she passed away from uterine cancer. Though she died young, Ada's legacy would endure far beyond her brief life. For many years, her work was overshadowed by the success of Charles Babbage and the eventual rise of electronic computing in the 20th century. It wasn't until the 1950s, 1960s, as computers began to revolutionize society, that Ada's contributions were rediscovered and celebrated. In the years following her death, Ada's name gained a new relevance as the computer age progressed. She was honored posthumously for her pioneering work in computer science, and her contributions to programming were increasingly recognized as foundational. Ada Lovelace's insights about the potential of computers to go beyond simple calculation and to perform any task that could be broken down into logical steps were ahead of their time. Today, Ada is remembered as one of the most significant figures in the history of computing. Her legacy lives on in the Ada programming language, named in her honor, and in the Ada Lovelace Day, a celebration of women in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, STEM. She continues to inspire countless individuals, particularly young women, to pursue careers in fields that have historically been dominated by men. Ada Lovelace, once forgotten and dismissed, is now widely regarded as a visionary who saw the potential of machines to transform society in ways no one else could imagine. As the night unfolds and you drift into sleep, think of Ada's brilliance, a mind ahead of its time, a soul whose intellect changed the course of history. Rest well, dear dreamer, knowing that even the smallest of ideas can grow into something monumental. In your dreams, may you see the world as Ada did, filled with endless possibilities. Marie Curie. In the quiet, cold streets of Warsaw, Poland, a young girl named Maria Sklodowska was born in 1867. Her family, although impoverished, was filled with intellect and a deep love for learning. Her father was a teacher, and her mother was a passionate educator who instilled in Marie the importance of education and hard work. Tragically, her mother passed away when Marie was just a child, and soon after, her father's health deteriorated as well. Despite these hardships, Marie excelled in her studies, earning top marks in mathematics and physics. From an early age, Marie was determined to pursue a life of science. However, in her homeland, where women had few opportunities to study, her dreams seemed impossible. Undeterred, she moved to Paris to continue her education at the Sorbonne, where she would be known as Marie Curie. In Paris, she embraced the world of scientific discovery with unyielding passion, living a modest life focused on her work. The world she entered was one of men and daunting competition, but Marie was determined to prove herself. Her rise to prominence came when she met Pierre Curie, a brilliant scientist who shared her love for research. Together, they formed a partnership that would forever change the world. They began studying the mysterious element known as uranium, which was emitting strange rays that could pass through solid objects. This discovery led Marie and Pierre to an entirely new realm of science, one that would eventually be called radioactivity. In the pursuit of this knowledge, they isolated two new elements, polonium, named after Marie's homeland, and radium. These discoveries, though groundbreaking, came with enormous personal cost. Marie's health began to deteriorate due to prolonged exposure to radioactive materials, but her commitment to understanding the nature of these substances never wavered. Marie's turning point came when Pierre, her beloved partner and husband, tragically died in a traffic accident in 1906. The loss was devastating, yet Marie did not retreat from her work. Instead, she carried on with her shared vision, and in 1911, she became the first woman ever to receive the Nobel Prize in Chemistry for her discovery of radium and polonium and her contributions to the understanding of radioactivity. Her success was a remarkable triumph for women in science, but it was also a bittersweet victory, as she continued to struggle with the loss of her husband and the toll her work was taking on her health. As the years went by, Marie Curie's life was marked by a deep sense of duty to science and humanity. During World War I, she contributed her knowledge of radiology to the war effort, developing mobile X-ray units to assist in diagnosing soldiers' injuries on the battlefield. Her pioneering work in this area saved countless lives, yet her continued exposure to radiation took its toll. Marie Curie's health continued to decline, and in 1934, she succumbed to aplastic anemia, a condition caused by prolonged radiation exposure. Marie Curie's legacy is immeasurable. She was a symbol of strength, resilience, and dedication. Her discoveries laid the foundation for modern nuclear physics and medicine, and her work continues to impact the world in ways she could never have imagined. She became the first woman to win a Nobel Prize, the first person to ever win 2 Nobel Prizes in different scientific fields, and the only woman to ever be laid to rest at the Pantheon in Paris for her own merits. Marie Curie not only changed the course of science, but also proved that women could excel in fields traditionally dominated by men. Reflecting on her life, we see a woman who embodied the pursuit of knowledge, never allowing obstacles to stand in her way. Her legacy is a beacon for all who dare to challenge the limits of possibility, for she demonstrated that even the most daunting challenges can be overcome through determination and passion. In her memory, we are reminded of the power of curiosity and the profound impact that one person's dedication can have on the world. As you settle into the soft embrace of sleep, imagine Marie Curie's unwavering spirit and her relentless pursuit of truth. Let her life be a reminder that even in the face of hardship, there is always room for discovery and progress. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and let the legacy of Marie Curie guide your dreams, inspiring you to reach for the stars and never give up on the pursuit of your passions, no matter how far they may take you. Frida Kahlo. Frida Kahlo's life, much like her art, was an intricate tapestry woven with threads of pain, passion, resilience, and beauty. Born on July 6, 1907, in Coyoacan, a small town near Mexico City, Frida came into the world at a time of political and cultural transformation in Mexico. The daughter of Matilde Calderón, a Mexican woman of indigenous descent, and Guillermo Kahlo, a German photographer, Frida was rooted in a mix of cultures and histories that would later influence her work. She grew up in a house that was, in many ways, a reflection of the struggles and contradictions of her country, a place filled with both immense beauty and deep challenges. Her early life was shaped by the realities of physical pain. At the age of 6, Frida contracted polio, a disease that left her with a noticeable limp. This physical disability, combined with her father's inability to offer her the care she needed, made her childhood a lonely and challenging one. She was often excluded from games with other children due to her condition, and she turned inward, developing a rich inner world that would later serve as the foundation for her artistic expression. It was during this time that Frida became acquainted with the idea of suffering, a concept she would embrace in her art as a constant companion. At the age of 18, Frida's life took a dramatic turn. She was involved in a catastrophic bus accident that shattered her body, leaving her with multiple fractures to her spine, pelvis, ribs, and legs. The injuries were so severe that Frida was bedridden for months, enduring agonizing pain and undergoing several surgeries. This moment of physical devastation would become the crucible in which Frida's artistic vision was forged. During her long recovery, she began to paint. Using a mirror placed above her bed, Frida began to create self-portraits, which would become a signature style in her work. The first of these paintings, Self-Portrait in a Velvet Dress, is a poignant reflection of the young woman who, despite her physical limitations, was beginning to embrace her artistic gifts. As Frida's health slowly began to recover, she moved to the United States with her family. It was here that her path would cross with that of Diego Rivera, one of Mexico's most prominent artists. Rivera's towering figure in the world of Mexican art, particularly his muralism, captivated Frida, and their relationship quickly deepened into a passionate love affair. They married in 1929, and although their union was fraught with turmoil, marked by Rivera's infidelities and Frida's own struggles with identity, their shared artistic vision formed the bedrock of their partnership. Diego encouraged Frida to embrace her own unique style, even as their personal lives became increasingly complicated. During their time together, Frida's artistic journey blossomed. While Rivera was painting large public murals depicting the working class and the struggles of the Mexican people, Frida's work remained deeply personal. Her paintings, often portraits of herself, conveyed a profound exploration of her identity as a woman, a Mexican, and a person in pain. Her work reflected not only her personal struggles with health, but also her views on gender, identity, and Mexican culture. Frida rejected the Eurocentric standards of beauty that dominated the art world and instead embraced her Mexican heritage. She adorned herself with traditional clothing, such as the brightly colored Tehuana dresses and elaborate jewelry, creating a visual language that spoke to both her pride in her roots and her defiance of mainstream beauty standards. Yeah, it was in the 1930s that Frida began to gain recognition as an artist. She had her first solo exhibition in New York City in 1938, where her work was met with both acclaim and shock. Critics marveled at the raw, unflinching honesty of her paintings, and Frida's works began to sell. Her self-portraits, particularly Self-Portrait with Thorn Necklace and Hummingbird, 1940, depicted not just the external reality of her suffering, but the internal emotional and psychological pain she experienced. The pain from her accident, the tumultuous relationship with Diego, and her constant battle with her health became central themes in her work. In this particular painting, Frida is seen wearing a necklace of thorns with a hummingbird hanging from it, a symbol of both her resilience and vulnerability. The turning point in Frida's life came in the early 1940s when her marriage to Diego began to crumble. Although they continued to maintain a professional relationship, Frida's emotional world became increasingly turbulent. Diego's affair with Frida's younger sister, Christina, added a layer of betrayal that deeply affected Frida. At the same time, Frida's health continued to deteriorate. She had been battling with constant physical pain from the injuries sustained in the bus accident, and her emotional struggles added to her sense of isolation. Despite these hardships, she continued to paint with a ferocity that would define her final years. Her paintings, often featuring surreal and symbolic imagery, became an outlet for her emotional and physical struggles. She painted her pain, her loneliness, and her sense of betrayal. But she also painted her hope, her power, and her strength. Frida's period of suffering reached its peak in the 1950s, when she was bedridden once again due to complications from her surgeries. Despite her declining health, she never ceased to paint. Her final works, including The Wounded Deer, 1946, and The Broken Column, 1944, are some of her most striking and intimate depictions of human suffering and survival. These pieces, filled with vibrant color and stark imagery, reveal the depths of her emotional and physical pain, but they also show an unwavering spirit. The Broken Column in The Broken Column represents her fractured body, but it also represents the strength she drew from within. Even in her darkest moments, Frida was creating, turning her suffering into art that would transcend time. Frida Kahlo passed away on July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, after a prolonged battle with her health. She had spent much of her life in pain, both physical and emotional, but it was through her art that she became a symbol of resilience and creativity. In the years following her death, her legacy grew, and she became an icon for women, for Mexican culture, and for anyone who had ever faced adversity. Frida Kahlo's life and art continue to inspire generations of artists, activists, and dreamers. She is remembered not just for her unique artistic style, but for her courage in confronting the most intimate and painful aspects of her life. Frida's work has become synonymous with self-expression, with a commitment to truth, and with the unflinching examination of one's own pain. Her art, so deeply personal, resonates with people from all walks of life, as it speaks to the universal experience of suffering, survival, and the power of creation. Through her eyes, we learn that pain, whether physical or emotional, does not diminish us. It becomes a part of our strength, a part of what makes us whole. Now, as you rest your head and drift into a peaceful slumber, think of Frida Kahlo, who, even in her pain, found a way to create beauty. Her legacy reminds us that no matter the trials we face, there is always room for transformation. Let her story of resilience and creativity fill your dreams. And may you too find the courage to face life with open arms, ready to create, ready to dream. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may Frida's strength accompany you in the quiet of the night. Rosalind Franklin. Rosalind Franklin's life, though often overshadowed by the achievements of others, stands as one of the most important stories in the history of science. Born on July 25, 1920, in London, England, Rosalind Elsie Franklin was a brilliant mind who faced significant challenges in a time when women were not always encouraged to pursue scientific careers. Raised in a well-educated Jewish family, Franklin was instilled with a sense of intellectual curiosity from an early age. Her father, who was a committed social reformer, valued education and ensured that his children had the best possible schooling, despite the barriers women faced at the time. Franklin's academic journey began at Newnham College, Cambridge, where she studied natural sciences. As a student, she was already known for her intelligence and tenacity. She received a degree in chemistry in 1941 and embarked on her career in science, which would eventually lead her to the cutting-edge world of molecular biology. However, the road ahead was far from straightforward. Women, especially Jewish women, faced significant challenges in the male-dominated scientific community, and Franklin was no exception. Despite her undeniable brilliance, she often found herself battling both professional and personal obstacles simply to be taken seriously. In 1947, Franklin moved to Paris, where she worked at the prestigious Laboratoire Central des Services Chimiques de l'État. Here she began her pioneering work in X-ray crystallography, a technique that would later prove vital to understanding the structure of DNA. This work marked the beginning of her rise to power in the scientific community. She became highly skilled at taking X-ray images of crystalline structures, a technique that would become the cornerstone of her later discoveries. It was during her time at King's College London that Franklin's contributions to the study of DNA began to unfold. In 1951, she joined the laboratory of Maurice Wilkins at King's College, where she began studying the molecular structure of DNA. Despite the growing tension between her and Wilkins, Franklin's work would soon prove to be a turning point in the history of biology. Using X-ray diffraction techniques, she captured the famous photograph 51, an image of DNA's double helix structure that would later become one of the most significant discoveries in molecular biology. The clarity and precision of this photograph provided critical evidence that DNA was composed of two intertwined helical strands, a discovery that would play a crucial role in unraveling the mystery of heredity. However, Franklin's early reign in the world of scientific discovery was marred by difficult interpersonal dynamics. Her relationship with Wilkins was strained, and she was not fully aware that her work was being shared with James Watson and Francis Crick, two researchers at the University of Cambridge, who were also trying to determine the structure of DNA. In a controversial moment in scientific history, Watson and Crick used Franklin's X-ray image without her consent, building upon her data to develop their model of the DNA double helix. In 1953, they published their groundbreaking paper on the structure of DNA, which earned them the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1962, alongside Maurice Wilkins. Franklin's name, however, was conspicuously absent from the prize, despite her significant contributions. The turning point in Franklin's career came in the aftermath of the DNA discovery. Though she did not receive the recognition she deserved during her lifetime, Franklin continued her scientific work undeterred. She shifted her focus to studying the structures of viruses, and her work in this area contributed significantly to the development of virology. By the time of her death in 1958, Franklin had already left a lasting impact on molecular biology, but the full extent of her legacy would not be realized for many years to come. Franklin's period of challenges and controversy did not overshadow her brilliance. While many in the scientific community continued to overlook her contributions, Franklin's work laid the foundation for the discovery of the double helix. Her detailed, meticulous approach to X-ray crystallography and her ability to capture high-quality images of molecular structures proved to be essential in advancing the understanding of the very building blocks of life. Her fall and death came far too soon. In 1956, at the age of 37, Franklin was diagnosed with ovarian cancer, which would claim her life just 2 years later. Her passing was a tragic loss to the world of science, but it also marked the beginning of a gradual reappraisal of her contributions. Over time, Franklin has been recognized as one of the most important figures in the history of molecular biology, with many acknowledging that her work was integral to the discovery of the DNA structure. Rosalind Franklin's historical meaning is profound. She was not only a brilliant scientist, but also a symbol of resilience in the face of sexism, intellectual theft, and professional marginalization. Her story is a reminder that science, like all human endeavors, is often messy, full of politics and human frailty. Yet it is also a tribute to the quiet power of persistence and the importance of acknowledging those whose contributions are often overlooked. As we reflect on her legacy, we realize that Rosalind Franklin's life is not just one of brilliance and lost opportunities, but also a powerful testament to the importance of scientific integrity and the role of women in shaping the future of science. Her name, once obscured by the shadows of others, has now emerged as one of the most celebrated in the annals of scientific history. Sir, and now as you drift into the night, dear dreamer, think of the quiet brilliance of Rosalind Franklin, whose meticulous work unlocked the secrets of life itself. May your dreams be filled with discoveries yet to be made, with the courage to seek knowledge and the strength to rise above the shadows. Sleep well. Eleanor Roosevelt. Eleanor Roosevelt's life was a testament to unwavering strength, compassion, and a deep commitment to social justice. Born on October 11, 1884, in New York City, Anna Eleanor Roosevelt was the niece of President Theodore Roosevelt and the daughter of Elliott Roosevelt and Anna Hall. Tragically, Eleanor's early life was marked by both personal loss and hardship. Her mother, Anna, was distant and often critical, and her father, though loving, struggled with alcoholism. When Eleanor was just 8 years old, her mother passed away, followed by the death of her father 2 years later. Left to navigate the world without the support of her parents, Eleanor was raised by her strict grandmother, who instilled in her a sense of responsibility, but was not particularly warm. This early childhood adversity forged in Eleanor a deep empathy for others and a profound understanding of the complexities of human struggle. Her rise to prominence began when she married her distant cousin, Franklin D. Roosevelt, in 1905. Franklin, a rising star in New York politics, was a man of charm and ambition. While Franklin's political career flourished, Eleanor's role seemed, at first, to be limited to the traditional expectations of a wife in the early 20th century. But Eleanor was no ordinary wife. She was driven by a sense of duty and an unyielding desire to make a meaningful impact on society. As Franklin's career progressed, she became more involved in public life, especially after he was stricken with polio in 1921, which left him partially paralyzed. During this time, Eleanor became his eyes and ears, stepping into roles that were traditionally filled by men. She gave speeches, attended meetings, and used her position to champion causes such as women's rights, civil rights, and social welfare. Eleanor's early reign as First Lady began in 1933 when Franklin D. Roosevelt was elected president. However, her approach to the role was anything but conventional. In an era when First Ladies were expected to remain behind the scenes, Eleanor took on an active public role, using her influence to advocate for the disenfranchised. She became an outspoken advocate for civil rights, working alongside African American leaders like Mary McLeod Bethune and advocating for racial equality in a period of severe racial segregation. At the same time, she was a tireless campaigner for women's rights, labor rights, and children's welfare. Her work with the New Deal programs helped improve the lives of the poor, but she was also often a vocal critic of policies she felt did not go far enough in addressing inequality. Eleanor's turning point came when she decided to use her voice more than ever before, particularly during World War II. As the war raged on, she became an unofficial ambassador for the United States, traveling around the world to visit troops and support the war effort. She also used her position to advocate for the rights of refugees and displaced persons, and after the war, she was instrumental in the creation of the United Nations. In 1945, she was appointed as the U.S. representative to the United Nations and later served as the chair of the Human Rights Commission. Her work with the United Nations led to the adoption of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a historic document that continues to shape global human rights standards today. Despite the criticism she faced, particularly from those who believed that a woman's place was not in the public sphere, Eleanor's influence only grew. Her resilience in the face of personal challenges, including the strains in her marriage due to Franklin's infidelities, became the hallmark of her character. She turned personal pain into a source of strength, and her public persona evolved to embody the values of dignity, justice, and empathy. However, Eleanor's period of personal and professional triumphs did not come without its struggles. The end of Franklin D. Roosevelt's presidency in 1945 and his death marked a significant shift in her life. Yet rather than retreating into a life of quiet reflection, Eleanor continued her advocacy and activism. She became a leading voice for the displaced and disenfranchised, and after Franklin's passing, she continued to serve in numerous roles, including as a delegate to the United Nations and as the first chair of the United Nations Commission on Human Rights. Eleanor's legacy and historical meaning are monumental. She was not only the First Lady of the United States, but also a pioneer for women in politics and a global advocate for human rights. Her advocacy for civil rights, her work with the United Nations, and her tireless commitment to social justice changed the role of First Lady from a ceremonial position to one of activism and influence. Eleanor Roosevelt redefined what it meant to be a public servant, pushing the boundaries of what a woman in her position could accomplish and leaving a legacy that still inspires generations of leaders and advocates today. As you settle in for the night, think of Eleanor Roosevelt's quiet strength and tireless determination to make the world a better place. Her life reminds us that we all have the power to create change, to stand up for what is right, and to lead with compassion. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may her story inspire you to embrace your own strength and continue striving for a better tomorrow. Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi, born on November 19, 1917, in Allahabad, India, was a woman of remarkable intellect, immense courage, and profound influence. She was the daughter of Jawaharlal Nehru, India's first prime minister, and Kamala Nehru, a woman who herself was deeply committed to India's independence struggle. From an early age, Indira was immersed in the political world, surrounded by the independence movement and the ideals of a new, post-colonial India. Her early years were marked by personal loss. Her mother passed away when she was just 28, and she faced a difficult childhood due to the political turmoil that engulfed the country. Indira's formative years were spent in the shadows of India's independence struggle. As a young girl, she witnessed the political passion of her father and the turmoil of the freedom movement. She attended schools in India and later studied at prestigious institutions in Europe and the United States, including the University of Oxford. Though India was still under British rule when she was born, Indira's childhood was shaped by her father's ideals and his dreams for an independent India. However, it wasn't until much later in life that she would fully embrace these ideals, stepping into the political arena herself. Indira's rise to power began in the 1950s, when her father, Jawaharlal Nehru, became the first prime minister of independent India. She initially started her career in politics as an assistant to her father, and in 1964, after Nehru's death, she was appointed as the Information and Broadcasting Minister in the government of Lal Bahadur Shastri. In 1966, after Shastri's sudden death, Indira was unexpectedly elected as the Prime Minister of India. despite the fact that she was not initially seen as a frontrunner. Her ascension to this pivotal role was, in part, due to her ability to navigate the complex political landscape of post-independence India and the influence of her father's legacy. Her early reign as prime minister was characterized by a blend of cautious diplomacy and bold political moves. Indira faced immense challenges during her early years in office. She took steps to strengthen the Indian economy and attempted to assert India's influence on the global stage. One of her key decisions during this time was the nationalization of banks in 1969, a move designed to give the government greater control over the country's financial resources. Despite initial opposition, this policy was a defining feature of her leadership, signaling her determination to use the power of the state to bring about social and economic reforms. However, the true turning point in Indira Gandhi's political life came during the 1970s. In 1971, India was involved in a war with Pakistan that led to the creation of Bangladesh. Indira's leadership during this time earned her widespread admiration, and she was hailed as the Iron Lady of India for her decisive action. However, her tenure also saw growing political unrest, and in 1975, faced with an increasingly hostile opposition, Indira Gandhi declared a state of emergency. This was a moment of drastic change in her leadership. The emergency lasted for 21 months, during which civil liberties were suspended, political opponents were imprisoned, and censorship was imposed on the media. While this period of authoritarian rule allowed Indira to consolidate her power, it also led to a significant backlash from the Indian public, who saw her actions as a threat to democracy. The emergency marked a period of profound political and social tension. Indira's decision to rule by decree was controversial, and it led to widespread protests and dissatisfaction. Many saw her actions as an abuse of power, and she faced criticism from both within her own party and from the opposition. However, when she called for elections in 1977, she was defeated, and the Congress Party suffered a major setback. Despite the defeat, Indira's political career was far from over. She made a remarkable comeback in 1980, winning the election and returning to power. During this time, she restored some of the social and economic policies that had been central to her earlier leadership. Though her later years in office were marked by increasing challenges and conflicts, particularly with the growing tensions in Punjab. Indira's fall came in 1984, when she ordered military action in the Golden Temple of Amritsar to flush out Sikh militants, an operation that resulted in significant casualties and ignited religious tensions. The operation, known as Operation Blue Star, severely damaged her reputation among the Sikh community and led to widespread unrest. A few months later, on October 31, 1984, Indira Gandhi was assassinated by her Sikh bodyguards, a tragic act that shocked the nation and the world. Her death was a turning point in Indian politics, leading to violent anti-Sikh riots across the country. The nation, which had admired her leadership, was left in mourning, and her assassination marked the end of an era. Indira Gandhi's legacy is complex and multifaceted. On one hand, she is remembered as a powerful, influential leader who made significant contributions to India's development. She played a crucial role in shaping India's foreign policy and in ensuring its sovereignty during a time of great global tension. Her policies on nationalization, self-reliance, and social justice continue to be subjects of debate in Indian politics today. However, her period of authoritarian rule during the emergency is often seen as a blemish on her legacy, a dark chapter in a career that otherwise promised to elevate India on the global stage. Indira Gandhi's story is one of perseverance, strength, and controversy. She embodied the spirit of India in many ways, striving to make it a powerful, self-reliant nation. Her determination and resilience, even in the face of personal and political adversity, remain an inspiration. Though her methods were sometimes controversial, her influence on Indian politics and society cannot be overstated. Her life reminds us of the complexities of leadership and the burdens that come with wielding power. As we rest tonight, let us remember the courage she showed in the face of immense challenges, and let her legacy encourage us to stand firm in our convictions, no matter the obstacles before us. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may Indira Gandhi's unwavering resolve guide you toward your own path of strength and perseverance. Margaret Thatcher. Margaret Thatcher, born on October 13, 1925, in Grantham, England, was a figure who would forever alter the landscape of British politics. Raised in a modest, middle-class family, she was the daughter of Alfred Roberts, a grocer and local politician, and Beatrice Roberts. From an early age, Margaret was instilled with a sense of discipline and the values of hard work. Her father particularly had a profound influence on her, fostering a belief in self-reliance and perseverance. Margaret often spoke of her childhood as being filled with lessons about personal responsibility and dedication to one's work. Her formative years were not without hardship. Growing up in post-World War II Britain, Margaret saw her community grapple with the ravages of war and economic struggle. Her academic ability was apparent from a young age, and she excelled at school. Margaret attended the University of Oxford, where she studied chemistry, a subject that was relatively rare for women at the time. During her time at Oxford, she became involved in student politics, developing the leadership skills that would serve her later in life. Upon graduation, she worked as a research chemist before transitioning into law, a decision that marked the beginning of her political career. Margaret Thatcher's rise to power began in 1959, when she was elected as the Member of Parliament for Finchley. Though she started in a period of political turbulence, she quickly made a name for herself due to her intelligence, unwavering convictions, and determination. By 1975, after a series of political challenges and internal party struggles, she became the leader of the Conservative Party, a position that few at the time thought a woman could ever hold. Yet, Margaret Thatcher, with her steadfast belief in the importance of free market economics, individual responsibility, and British strength, defied the odds. Her leadership was unconventional, but it resonated with many in Britain who were disillusioned with the existing political climate. Her early reign as Prime Minister, beginning in 1979, was marked by a commitment to significant economic reform. Thatcher faced a Britain struggling with high inflation, unemployment, and declining industrial power. The country was mired in what was known as the Winter of Discontent, where strikes and industrial actions paralyzed much of the nation. In the face of this chaos, Margaret Thatcher's policies, collectively known as Thatcherism, sought to revive the British economy by reducing the power of trade unions, privatizing state-owned industries, and reducing government spending. Her approach was direct, controversial, and at times divisive. But as the years went by, it became clear that Thatcher was determined to bring about a dramatic transformation in British society. One of her most notable actions was the privatization of numerous state-owned industries, from British Telecom to British Airways. This shift toward privatization was central to her belief in free markets and competition. Thatcher also faced fierce opposition from trade unions, especially during the miners' strike of 1984-1985. This was a defining moment in her leadership. The strike lasted for over a year, and Thatcher's decision to stand firm against the unions earned her both admiration and criticism. For many, her handling of the strike was seen as a necessary step to curb the power of labor unions, while for others, it was a symbol of her uncompromising nature and disregard for the working class. However, it was her foreign policy decisions that truly solidified her place in history. One of her most defining moments came in 1982 during the Falklands War. When Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, a British overseas territory, Thatcher's response was swift and resolute. She sent British forces to reclaim the islands, a bold military action that resulted in victory for Britain. The successful outcome of the war boosted her popularity and demonstrated her determination to defend British interests, no matter the cost. The Falklands War proved to be a defining event in Thatcher's tenure, reinforcing her reputation as a strong and decisive leader on the world stage. Yet, as time went on, cracks began to show in Thatcher's leadership. The very policies that had made her so popular among certain segments of society also made her deeply unpopular with others. The introduction of the community charge, or poll tax, in 1989, a flat-rate tax on individuals, led to widespread protests and contributed to her falling popularity. Despite her many accomplishments, it became increasingly clear that her grip on power was beginning to slip. In 1990, after losing the support of key figures within her party, Thatcher was forced to resign as prime minister. It was a moment of profound loss, not just for Thatcher herself, but for the country that had been so shaped by her policies. Her fall from power was swift and dramatic, but it did not erase the impact she had on both Britain and the world. Margaret Thatcher's tenure left a deep imprint on the Conservative Party and on the broader British political landscape. She had reshaped Britain's economic policies, reduced the influence of labor unions, and ushered in an era of privatization and free market capitalism. Her legacy is complex and divisive. To some, she is the Iron Lady who restored Britain to global prominence. To others, she is the embodiment of callousness, responsible for deepening social divisions. Margaret Thatcher's historical meaning is a subject of intense debate. She was a champion of free market policies and individualism, and she redefined what it meant to be a conservative leader in the 20th century. Her legacy in international affairs, particularly her role in ending the Cold War alongside U.S. President Ronald Reagan, remains a testament to her influence on global geopolitics. Yet her leadership style and policies remain contentious, with many arguing that her emphasis on market-driven policies came at the expense of social welfare and increased inequality. As we close our eyes tonight, let us reflect on Margaret Thatcher's journey, her rise, her battles, and her unyielding commitment to her ideals. She was a woman who broke barriers, stood firm in the face of adversity, and left an indelible mark on the world. Her story is one of strength, resilience, and conviction, a reminder that true leadership requires the courage to stand alone and the determination to follow one's beliefs, no matter the cost. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may the lessons of resilience and perseverance inspire you as you journey through your dreams. Angela Merkel. Angela Merkel, born on July 17, 1954, in Hamburg, West Germany, is one of the most influential and respected political figures in the world. Raised in the former East Germany, Merkel's early life was shaped by the Cold War division of Germany. Her father, a Protestant pastor, moved the family to the eastern part of the country when she was a child, and they lived under the authoritarian regime of the German Democratic Republic, GDR. Merkel's family instilled in her the values of intellectual curiosity, resilience, and a sense of social responsibility, which would serve her throughout her life. Growing up in the GDR, Merkel experienced a different reality from that of her peers in the West. She was educated at the University of Leipzig, where she studied physics, and later earned a doctorate in quantum chemistry from the Central Institute for Physical Chemistry in East Berlin. Merkel's scientific background was unique in the world of politics, and it would shape her pragmatic, methodical approach to governance. In an era when most leaders were focused on ideological divides, Merkel's background in the sciences enabled her to approach problems with a level-headed, evidence-based perspective. Merkel entered politics in the late 1980s, following the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the subsequent reunification of Germany. Initially, she was involved in the political transformation of East Germany, joining the newly formed Christian Democratic Union, CDU, in 1989. Her rise within the CDU was rapid, marked by her careful navigation through the complex landscape of German politics. By 1991, Merkel had been appointed Minister for Women and Youth in Chancellor Helmut Kohl's government. At the time, she was a fresh face in German politics, but her sharp intellect and steady demeanor quickly caught the attention of her colleagues. In 2000, after a period of rising through the ranks, Merkel became the leader of the CDU. She had been part of a new wave of leadership that was focused on modernization, and she was seen as a departure from the traditional, older generation of German politicians. With a calm, deliberate approach, Merkel steadily worked to build bridges with both the East and West factions of Germany, a crucial task in the aftermath of reunification. Her pragmatic, non-ideological style of leadership allowed her to appeal to a broad base of support, and by 2005, she became the first female chancellor of Germany, a position that no one, not even Merkel herself, had expected her to reach. Merkel's early years in office were marked by her quiet, methodical approach to governance. She faced several major challenges, including the ongoing issues of European integration, Germany's response to the Iraq War, and a rapidly changing global political landscape. Merkel quickly made it clear that her leadership style would be based on consensus building, pragmatism, and stability. Her government focused on both domestic and international issues, from economic reforms in Germany to strengthening the European Union. One of Merkel's most notable achievements during her early reign was her handling of the 2008 global financial crisis. As European economies teetered on the brink of collapse, Merkel's strong leadership and insistence on fiscal discipline helped steer Germany through the turbulent period. Her government introduced a series of reforms aimed at stabilizing the German economy, and steadfast commitment to the European Union helped to ensure that Germany remained a key player in the global financial system. Her ability to balance both national interests and European unity became a hallmark of her leadership. As Merkel's time in office continued, she gained a reputation for her steady hand during times of crisis. She played a pivotal role in addressing the European debt crisis, which had severely impacted countries like Greece, Portugal, and Spain. Merkel's response to the crisis was multifaceted. She pushed for austerity measures in the affected countries, while also working to secure the stability of the Eurozone. This approach earned her both admiration and criticism, as many saw her as a stern guardian of fiscal discipline, while others accused her of being too focused on economic concerns at the expense of social welfare. Perhaps Merkel's most defining moment came in 2015, when she made the controversial decision to open Germany's borders to over 1 million refugees fleeing war and violence in the Middle East and Africa. The decision sparked intense debate both within Germany and across Europe. Merkel's open-door policy was widely praised by human rights organizations, but was also met with strong opposition from political groups and citizens who felt the move would strain Germany's resources and threaten social stability. Despite this, Merkel remained steadfast in her belief that Germany had a moral obligation to help those in need. This moment highlighted her willingness to make difficult decisions based on her principles, even when faced with considerable opposition. Throughout her tenure, Merkel maintained a reputation for calm and measured leadership, especially in contrast to the more flamboyant and often volatile figures who populated European and global politics. Her ability to navigate the complexities of both European and global diplomacy made her a key figure in international relations. Merkel became known as the de facto leader of the European Union, shaping the EU's response to a range of crises, including Brexit, the rise of populism, and the ongoing challenges of climate change and migration. However, as with all great leaders, Merkel's leadership was not without its challenges. In the later years of her tenure, her approval ratings began to wane, particularly as the refugee crisis continued to dominate the political landscape. The rise of right-wing populism in Germany and other parts of Europe also posed a significant challenge to her government. Merkel faced increasing pressure from within her own party to take a harder stance on immigration and border security. But she remained committed to her values of openness and solidarity. In 2018, Merkel announced that she would not seek re-election as chancellor, signaling the end of an era. After 16 years in office, her departure marked the conclusion of a leadership style defined by patience, pragmatism, and a commitment to European unity. Merkel's legacy is complex and multifaceted, but she will be remembered as one of the most influential and stable leaders in modern European history. Angela Merkel's historical significance lies in her ability to navigate crises, her commitment to European unity, and her quiet but unwavering leadership. She transformed Germany into an economic powerhouse, helped steer the European Union through turbulent times, and set a model for pragmatic, calm leadership in the face of adversity. As one of the longest-serving leaders in Europe, Merkel's tenure has left an indelible mark on both Germany and the world. And now, as you drift into slumber, let the calm certainty of Merkel's steady leadership guide your dreams. Like her, may you approach the challenges of your life with wisdom, patience, and a steady resolve. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your dreams be filled with the same quiet strength that defined one of the greatest leaders of our time. Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, born on February 4, 1913, in Tuskegee, Alabama, became one of the most iconic figures in the American civil rights movement. Her story, however, is not one defined by a single act of defiance, but by the steadfast courage that fueled her entire life. Growing up in the segregated South, Rosa's experiences with racial injustice shaped her into the woman who would later be remembered as the mother of the civil rights movement. Rosa's early life was marked by the challenges that came with living in a deeply divided society. Her family, although not wealthy, was deeply committed to the values of education and self-respect. Rosa's mother, Leona Macaulay, was a school teacher who instilled a love for learning and a strong sense of dignity in her daughter. Rosa's father, James Macaulay, was a carpenter who left the family when she was young, leaving her mother to raise her and her younger brother. Rosa's family faced constant hardships, but they found strength in their close-knit, supportive community. During her childhood, Parks was subjected to the harsh realities of segregation. African Americans were denied the most basic human rights. They were prohibited from using the same public facilities, attending the same schools, or even sitting in the same sections of buses, trains, or theaters as white people. However, Rosa's early experiences were also marked by defiance. In her youth, she attended a segregated school where she excelled academically and began to develop a keen awareness of the injustices around her. As Rosa grew older, she became involved in various civil rights organizations, including the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, NAACP. At the time, the NAACP was working tirelessly to challenge the status quo of segregation and racial inequality, and Rosa became an active member. She served as the secretary for the Montgomery chapter of the NAACP, and her role in organizing efforts was key in raising awareness of the everyday violence and discrimination faced by African Americans in the South. Rosa's life changed forever on December 1, 1955, when she boarded a bus in Montgomery, Alabama, after a long day at work. Parks, tired but resolute, took a seat in the colored section of the bus. At that time, the bus was segregated by law, and once the white section filled up, African Americans were expected to stand so that white passengers could sit. On that fateful day, the bus driver ordered Rosa to vacate her seat for a white passenger. Parks, weary of the injustices she had endured for so long, refused to give up her seat. In that simple but powerful act, Rosa Parks sparked a movement that would forever alter the course of history. Her arrest that day was the catalyst for the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted for over a year and became a defining moment in the civil rights movement. African Americans, led by a young minister named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., refused to ride the buses in protest of the discriminatory practices. The boycott was an enormous success, severely affecting the bus company's finances and drawing national attention to the cause. In the end, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation on public buses was unconstitutional, a monumental victory for the civil rights movement. Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat was not the first time that she had challenged segregation. Throughout her life, she had quietly resisted the dehumanizing policies of racial inequality in the South. However, her act of defiance on that bus became the flashpoint for a larger movement. It was not just one woman's protest, but a collective stand against injustice that resonated with thousands and eventually millions of people across the nation. Despite her newfound fame, Rosa Parks faced a great deal of adversity in the aftermath of her act of resistance. She lost her job at a department store, and she and her husband, Raymond Parks, were forced to move from Montgomery. The couple eventually relocated to Detroit, Michigan, where Rosa continued her work for civil rights. She worked as a secretary for U.S. Representative John Conyers and remained active in the civil rights community, working alongside other notable leaders, including Dr. King and the great activist A. Philip Randolph. However, Parks's contribution to the movement was not limited to her famous bus protest. She continued to be involved in advocating for racial equality, focusing on issues such as housing, employment, and education for African Americans. She worked to promote the idea that all people, regardless of race, were entitled to the same freedoms and opportunities. Parks's unwavering commitment to equality, justice, and nonviolence made her a hero not just of the civil rights movement, but of the broader human rights struggle. Rosa Parks' legacy extends far beyond the confines of the American civil rights movement. She became a symbol of quiet dignity and strength, showing the world that courage does not always have to be loud or grandiose. It can be found in the small, everyday decisions that stand up to injustice. Throughout her life, Parks remained steadfast in her belief that change was not only necessary but achievable through persistence and determination. She always spoke about the importance of standing up for what was right, no matter the cost. In the years that followed her pivotal act of resistance, Rosa Parks was recognized with numerous awards and honors, including the Congressional Gold Medal, the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Award. But perhaps the most fitting tribute to her legacy is the impact her actions had on future generations. Her bravery and resolve continue to inspire those who fight for justice, equality, and human dignity all around the world. Rosa Parks passed away on October 24, 2005, at the age of 92. But her spirit lives on in the ongoing fight for racial equality. Her role in shaping American history cannot be overstated. The woman who sparked a revolution simply by refusing to give up her seat on a bus left an indelible mark on history and continues to be remembered as one of the key figures in the struggle for civil rights. As you close your eyes and drift into slumber, think of Rosa's quiet strength and her unyielding commitment to justice. Just as she stood firm in the face of oppression, may you find the courage to stand up for what is right in your own life, no matter how small the act. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and let her legacy guide you in your journey toward a better tomorrow. Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou, born Marguerite Ann Johnson on April 4, 1928, in St. Louis, Missouri, is a name that echoes through the corridors of literature, civil rights activism, and artistic expression. Her life is an inspiring testament to resilience, strength, and the transformative power of words. Maya's journey was one shaped by immense challenges, yet her spirit remained unbroken, forever shaping the world with her voice and her writings. Her early years were marked by trauma and displacement. As a child, Maya and her brother were sent to live with their paternal grandmother, Annie Henderson, in Stamps, Arkansas, after their parents' troubled marriage resulted in a separation. It was here in the Deep South that young Maya experienced firsthand the sting of racism and discrimination. The oppressive atmosphere of the segregated South would leave an indelible mark on her, one that she would later confront confront in her writing. At the age of 7, Maya's life was shattered when she was sent to live with her mother in St. Louis. There, she was raped by her mother's boyfriend, a traumatic experience that silenced her for almost 5 years. She believed that her voice had been the cause of his death after he was murdered shortly after the assault. And so, in an attempt to protect herself and the memory of her loved ones, she refused to speak. It was during this period of silence that Maya discovered the healing power of literature and poetry, as well as her deep love for literature and the written word. Maya's love for words was first nurtured by her brother, who introduced her to a world of books and stories. She read avidly, finding solace in the works of great authors like Charles Dickens, William Shakespeare, and Edgar Allan Poe. Her grandmother also encouraged her, reminding her that knowledge was something no one could ever take away from her. Slowly, Maya began to regain her voice, not through speech, but through writing. She found power in the words of others, and in time, she would find her own voice to share with the world. As Maya grew older, she continued to face the barriers and struggles of being an African American woman in a society that was deeply segregated and biased. But she found ways to transcend the obstacles that life threw at her. She was a natural performer, and her talents led her to the stage. Maya Angelou pursued a career in dance, theater, and music, performing across the United States and abroad. She even spent a time in Africa, where she lived in Ghana, immersing herself in the culture and history of the continent. Her time in Africa was crucial in shaping her perspective on race and identity, further fueling her determination to speak out about the struggles of marginalized communities. Maya's rise to prominence came not just through her performances, but through her ability to convey the human experience with unmatched emotional depth. Her autobiographical works were revolutionary in their openness and honesty, particularly her first autobiography, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, published in 1969. In it, she chronicled her childhood, her struggles with sexual trauma, and the oppressive forces of racism, all with an unflinching honesty that struck readers deeply. The book became an instant classic, breaking barriers in how African American women, particularly those who had faced similar trials, could find healing through storytelling. With the publication of I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, Maya Angelou's voice became an indomitable force in the literary world. She was no longer just an artist or performer. She had become a champion for the marginalized, a voice for the voiceless. Her words resonated with people from all walks of life, and her ability to intertwine themes of personal pain with universal messages of strength and perseverance captured the hearts of millions. As the years passed, Maya's career blossomed, and she continued to produce works of unparalleled significance. Her poetry, essays, and subsequent autobiographies further solidified her role as a cultural and literary icon. Works like Gathered Together, In My Name and Singin' and Swingin' and Gettin' Merry Like Christmas continued to illuminate her personal journey and the broader African American experience. Each word she wrote carried with it the wisdom of someone who had lived through adversity and emerged victorious, reminding her readers that they too could overcome. In addition to her literary achievements, Maya was deeply involved in the civil rights movement. She worked alongside figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X, lending her talents to their causes. During this time, she served as a coordinator for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, SCLC, and worked with King in the fight for racial justice and equality. Her friendship with Dr. King remained one of the most significant relationships of her life, and his assassination in 1968 was a devastating blow. Still, Maya's commitment to activism remained steadfast, as she continued to speak out against injustice through her art and her advocacy. Throughout her career, Maya Angelou received numerous awards and honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom, the National Medal of Arts, and the Pulitzer Prize nomination for her poetry. But perhaps her greatest gift was the way she lived her life, with grace, resilience, and an unwavering commitment to the power of love, humanity, and the written word. Despite the accolades, Maya never lost sight of her mission. She spoke frequently of the importance of using one's voice to make a difference, and in doing so, she became a beacon of light for generations of writers, activists, and individuals seeking their own way in the world. Her famous words, "We delight in the beauty of the butterfly, but rarely admit the changes it has gone through to achieve that beauty," remain a powerful reminder that the path to transformation is often painful, but ultimately rewarding. Maya Angelou's legacy is not only defined by her literary works, but also by the countless lives she touched through her speeches, her activism, and her ability to connect with people from all walks of life. Her words continue to inspire and guide us, reminding us of the importance of speaking truth to power, embracing our humanity, and fighting for justice in all its forms. Even after her passing on May 28, 2014, her presence in the world continues to be felt, as her works remain a testament to the power of the human spirit. As you lay down to rest tonight, may Maya Angelou's words echo in your heart. We may encounter many defeats, but we must not be defeated. Let her legacy of resilience and strength carry you through the night, reminding you that no matter the challenges you face, you too have the power to rise above them. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and may your dreams be filled with the courage to speak your truth, just as Maya did. Malala Yousafzai. Malala Yousafzai's life is a shining example of courage, resilience, and unwavering commitment to education. Born on July 12, 1997, in Mingora, Pakistan, Malala's story is not just one of personal triumph, but a global symbol of the power of one voice to challenge oppression and inspire change. From a young age, Malala showed an extraordinary love for learning and an unyielding belief that education was not just a right, but a powerful tool for shaping a better future. Malala's childhood was marked by the beauty of her homeland, the Swat Valley in northern Pakistan, known for its lush green valleys and towering mountains. However, this idyllic backdrop would soon be overshadowed by the rise of the Taliban's influence in the region. The group imposed harsh restrictions on the people, particularly targeting girls' education. Malala, however, was determined to defy the status quo and pursue her education. She was inspired by her father, Ziauddin Yousafzai, a passionate educator and social activist who believed in the power of knowledge to transform lives. He had always encouraged Malala to speak her mind and to fight for what she believed in, even when it was difficult. Malala's journey to global recognition began when, at the age of 11, she wrote a blog under a pseudonym for the BBC Urdu, detailing her life under the growing influence of the Taliban and the challenges she faced in going to school. The blog was a candid account of how the Taliban was enforcing a ban on girls' education, something that Malala could not accept. In her writings, she described the fear and uncertainty that had overtaken her community, but also her deep desire to continue her studies despite the dangers. Her writing caught the attention of journalist Adam B. Selleck, who began following her story. Over time, Malala became a voice of defiance and courage, advocating for the rights of girls to receive an education. Her message resonated not just in Pakistan, but around the world. She soon became an internationally recognized advocate for girls' education and gender equality, using her platform to speak out against the violence and intimidation that sought to silence young girls who dared to dream of a future beyond the restrictions placed upon them. However, Malala's advocacy came at a great personal cost. On October 9, 2012, while traveling home from school on a bus, Malala was shot in the head by a Taliban gunman. The assassination attempt was an attempt to silence her, to erase the message she had so courageously shared with the world. But instead of extinguishing her voice, the attack only amplified it. Malala was airlifted to Birmingham, England, where she underwent multiple surgeries and a long period of recovery. Though the physical wounds were severe, the psychological scars from the attack could not dampen her resolve. During her recovery, Malala became an even more prominent figure, speaking out in interviews, meeting with world leaders, and continuing to advocate for girls' education on an even larger scale. She did not let the violence that had been inflicted upon her diminish her message. If anything, it made her determination stronger. In 2013, Malala co-authored the memoir, I Am Malala, the girl who stood up for education and was shot by the Taliban. In it, she shared her personal story, the challenges she faced, and the hope she held for the future. The book resonated deeply with readers around the world, further solidifying Malala's place as a global icon for education and human rights. The memoir not only chronicled her life, but also became a powerful call to action for people everywhere to join the fight for equal access to education. Malala's courage and advocacy were recognized globally, and in 2014, at the age of 17, she became the youngest ever recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee lauded her struggle against the suppression of children and young people and for the right of all children to education. Malala's Nobel Prize was not just a recognition of her personal bravery, but also a recognition of the millions of girls around the world who still face obstacles to their education and the fundamental right to live without fear. Despite facing immense adversity, Malala continued to press forward, founding the Malala Fund, a nonprofit organization dedicated to ensuring 12 years of free, quality education for girls in the most vulnerable regions of the world. Through the Malala Fund, she has supported local education activists and programs that bring education to girls who would otherwise be denied it. Her work through the fund has impacted millions of young girls, giving them hope for a brighter future where education can break the cycle of poverty and discrimination. Malala's message is one of universal empowerment and equality. She believes that girls' education is not just about providing opportunities for individual growth, but about creating a ripple effect of change in entire communities and societies. According to Malala, one child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world. Her words resonate deeply, reminding us that each small step toward equality, justice, and peace has the potential to make a monumental difference. Over the years, Malala's advocacy has taken her to the halls of the United Nations, where she delivered a stirring speech on her 16th birthday in 2013, now known as Malala Day. In this speech, she called for worldwide access to education, specifically for girls, and stressed the importance of education in eradicating poverty, violence, and inequality. Malala's speech made headlines worldwide as her words captured the attention of leaders, activists, and people from all corners of the globe. Malala's achievements go beyond her work for education. She has become a symbol of resilience, a voice for those who have been silenced, and an example of the power of one individual to spark global change. Through her unwavering determination, she has inspired millions of people to stand up for what they believe in and to fight for the rights of others. Her journey, from a young girl in Pakistan to a global symbol of hope, demonstrates that the courage to speak out can alter the course of history. As the years continue to unfold, Malala remains committed to her mission of advocating for girls' education and human rights. She is now studying at Oxford University, continuing her education and further expanding her voice. With every step she takes, she continues to inspire and remind the world that no matter how great the obstacles, a single voice can spark a revolution. Malala's legacy is already deeply ingrained in the fight for girls' education, but it is also a reminder that the pursuit of justice, equality, and dignity is a lifelong endeavor. She has shown that no matter how impossible the challenge may seem, the human spirit is capable of extraordinary courage. As you drift into sleep tonight, let Malala's story be a reminder of the power of education, the importance of speaking out for what is right, and the strength of a single voice in the face of adversity. May her journey inspire you to keep fighting for the change you wish to see in the world, no matter how small your steps may seem. Sleep well, dear dreamer, and let your dreams be filled with hope, courage, and the belief that you too can make a difference. Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, often affectionately referred to as RBG, was a legal icon whose influence on the law, women's rights, and the pursuit of justice transcended the courts. Born on March 15, 1933, in Brooklyn, New York, Ginsburg grew up in a time when societal norms strongly dictated the roles of women, limiting their opportunities and often undermining their voices. Despite this, her early life was shaped by the unwavering support of her mother, who instilled in her a belief in education and the importance of standing up for what was right. Ruth's mother, Celia Bader, was a remarkable woman who, though she never attended college herself, valued education above all else. She emphasized the importance of intellectual pursuits, teaching Ruth the value of hard work and perseverance. Ruth's father, Nathan Bader, was a Jewish immigrant who worked as a furrier, and though his work was physically demanding, he too stressed the importance of education. Unfortunately, Ruth's mother passed away when Ruth was just 17. But her memory lived on throughout Ruth's life, influencing her work and her commitment to gender equality. In a time when opportunities for women were often limited, Ruth was determined to pursue her education. She graduated from Cornell University in 1954 with a bachelor's degree in government, and it was at Cornell where she met her future husband, Martin Ginsburg, a fellow student and an accomplished lawyer. The couple married in 1955, and Ruth followed Martin to Harvard Law School, where she was one of only 9 women in a class of about 500 men. Even as she excelled academically, Ruth faced discrimination and bias, often being relegated to the background simply because she was a woman. Her experience at Harvard, however, only fueled her determination to succeed. Ruth's time at Harvard was marked by numerous challenges. She faced the pressure of balancing her studies with raising a young daughter, Jane, and supporting her husband, who was diagnosed with cancer during their time in law school. Ruth, however, never let these obstacles deter her. She graduated first in her class at Columbia Law School in 1959, one of the few women in a field dominated by men. Despite her exceptional academic achievements, she struggled to find a job after graduation, as many law firms were unwilling to hire a woman. But Ruth's determination never wavered. Instead of succumbing to frustration, she took on roles that allowed her to challenge the legal status quo. She began her career as a law clerk for Judge Edmund Palmieri in New York, where she gained invaluable experience that would later inform her legal career. She went on to teach at Rutgers Law School, becoming one of the few women to do so at the time. It was during her time at Rutgers that she became deeply involved in gender discrimination cases, and she began advocating for the recognition of women's legal rights under the law. One of the most defining moments in Ruth Bader Ginsburg's career came in the early 1970s, when she co-founded the Women's Rights Project at the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU. Ruth's legal advocacy work would soon transform the landscape of American law. She strategically selected cases that would challenge gender discrimination, tackling laws that explicitly treated men and women unequally. Ruth's most famous early victory was in the case of Frontiero versus Richardson, which challenged the military's unequal benefits policies for men and women. Although she did not win the case, the arguments she presented laid the groundwork for future legal challenges to gender discrimination. Ruth's landmark case, however, came in Reed versus Reed in 1971, when the Supreme Court ruled that a law that automatically preferred men over women in the administration of estates was unconstitutional. Ruth argued the case, and it marked the first time the Supreme Court had struck down a law based on gender discrimination. The ruling set a precedent for future gender equality cases and solidified Ruth's reputation as one of the foremost advocates for women's rights in America. Her efforts were not only significant in advancing women's legal rights, but also helped establish the principle of equality under the law, regardless of gender. Ruth Bader Ginsburg's impact on gender equality and the law continued to grow throughout her career, and in 1980, she was nominated by President Jimmy Carter to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit. She served there for over a decade before President Bill Clinton nominated her to the U.S. Supreme Court in 1993. Ruth's confirmation to the highest court in the land was a historic moment, as she became only the second woman ever appointed to the Supreme Court after Sandra Day O'Connor. As a justice, she became known for her fierce dissents and her commitment to upholding constitutional values, particularly in the areas of civil liberties and gender equality. Ruth's tenure on the Supreme Court was marked by her strong stance on gender equality, civil rights, and reproductive freedoms. She consistently advocated for the protection of women's rights, the LGBTQ+ community, and marginalized groups. Her dissenting opinion in Shelby County versus Holder, 2013, in which the court struck down key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, was one of her most notable dissents, where she famously wrote that the decision was akin to throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. Her opinions reflected a deep belief in justice and fairness for all people, regardless of their gender, race, or social status. Ruth's legal philosophy was grounded in her belief that the Constitution is a living document, one that must evolve with the times in order to address the needs of society. Her ability to bridge the gap between traditional legal interpretations and modern challenges made her a highly respected figure in legal circles, and her influence extended far beyond the walls of the Supreme Court. Despite her towering presence in the legal world, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was known for her humility, wit, and dedication to the pursuit of justice. She worked tirelessly throughout her career, even in her later years, when her health began to decline. She became a cultural icon, celebrated not only for her groundbreaking legal work, but also for her role as a champion of equality and fairness. Her image, often seen with her trademark collar, became synonymous with the fight for justice and the protection of rights. Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away on September 18, 2020, at the age of 87, after a battle with pancreatic cancer. Her death marked the end of an era for the Supreme Court, and the nation mourned the loss of a legal giant. Her legacy, however, continues to inspire generations of women, lawyers, and advocates for equality. Ruth's work and her impact on the law remain an indelible part of American history. As you close your eyes tonight, dear dreamer, let the legacy of Ruth Bader Ginsburg remind you of the power of perseverance, the importance of fighting for justice, and the potential of one individual to change the world. Sleep well, knowing that, like Ruth, you too can stand up for what is right, challenge the status quo, and create a better tomorrow.